Beneath China's mountains, deserts, and rivers lie stories no dynasty ever finished writing, civilizations that vanished, artifacts that defy logic, and tombs sealed with secrets we were never meant to open. For every scroll we've translated, 100 more whisper in forgotten scripts. This isn't history. It's an unsolved riddle carved in stone, set on fire, and buried under centuries of silence. These are the 49 most unexplained mysteries of ancient China. Some were lost, some were hidden, and some never wanted to be found. Before we dive in, quick thing. If you're into dark riddles, forgotten kingdoms, and the kind of ancient weirdness that makes archaeologists lose sleep, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. It helps us dig deeper, literally. And while you're here, drop a comment below. Where are you watching from? And what time is it right now? Midnight in Malaysia? Noon in New York? 3 a.m. in your blanket fort with a flashlight and existential dread? We want to know. Let's see who else is wandering through the mystery with you. The Xia dynasty's existence. You know your civilization has a PR problem when even its existence is up for debate. That's the Xia dynasty, China's OG dynasty, the supposed great-grandfather of Chinese civilization, and possibly the historical equivalent of a resume padding. According to ancient texts, the Xia ruled from around 2070 to 1600 BC. But the thing about ancient texts is, they're usually written by people with a flair for dramatics and a very specific political agenda. Most of what we know or think we know about the Xia comes from sources like the records of the Grand Historian and the Bamboo Annals, written centuries later by men who had never seen the Xia, but definitely had strong opinions about how important it was that the Xia existed. Archaeologists have tried to give the Xia some real estate in the physical world by pointing at the Erlitou culture. See? They say, gesturing toward bronze ceremonial items and neatly laid foundations. This totally looks like a dynasty. But the problem is, the Erlitou site, while advanced and tempting, has no engraved welcome mat reading, "Welcome to the Xia." No inscriptions, no royal seals, no receipts. Just silence, and some suspiciously well-organized pottery. Meanwhile, the Shang dynasty, the one that allegedly came after the Xia, is overflowing with evidence: oracle bones, royal tombs, ceremonial bronzes, spooky divinations etched onto turtle shells. It's like a historical fireworks show compared to Xia's whisper in the dark. So we're left wondering, if the Xia really existed, why were they so bad at leaving a trace? Did they not get the memo that future historians require more than vibes? There's a theory that the Xia were less of a real dynasty and more of a convenient placeholder, a retroactive attempt to establish a neat, linear narrative for Chinese civilization. Of course, we had a proper first dynasty, ancient historians might have said, nervously scribbling in their bamboo slips. We're not savages. It's like claiming you had a serious relationship in high school just to sound more experienced at the reunion. No photos, no witnesses, but trust me, it was real. And yet, the Xia keep hovering at the edge of plausibility, too coherent to fully dismiss, too elusive to confirm. Every few years, a new dig turns up something tantalizing: burned palaces, ritual jades, even musical instruments, but nothing screams dynasty. Just echoes, artifacts, and a gaping historical shrug. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the Xia were never meant to be found. Maybe they're the ancient equivalent of Schrödinger's cat, both a dynasty and not a dynasty, until someone finally digs up a jade tablet reading, "Property of Emperor Yu." But don't worry, if the Xia didn't exist, something else did. And if you think they were strange, wait until you meet the neighbors. The Sanxingdui civilization. Imagine waking up one day and realizing your entire national history book forgot to mention an entire civilization, one with gold masks, alien eyes, and a taste for melting bronze into nightmares. That's pretty much what happened in 1929 when a farmer in Sichuan tried to dig a well and instead unearthed what looked like an ancient horror movie prop department. Congratulations, China. You forgot Sanxingdui. Since that discovery, archaeologists have pulled out massive bronze trees, towering masks with bulging eyes, and statues of what appeared to be ancient spacemen, or possibly gods, or possibly ancient spacemen pretending to be gods? No one's entirely sure, which is a running theme with Sanxingdui. The style is so radically different from traditional Chinese art that, for a while, scholars wondered if they'd stumbled upon an interdimensional detour rather than an actual historical site. The artifacts date back to around 1200 BC, which places them squarely in the late Shang dynasty era. But here's the catch. They don't look Shang. They don't look like anything we've found in the rest of ancient China. Their bronze working was absurdly sophisticated, so advanced in fact that the molds used to create some of the sculptures suggest industrial-level technology. This was not some fringe village improvising with bronze. This was a complex, highly organized civilization that then just vanished. The Sanxingdui people, possibly related to the Shu Kingdom, seemed to flourish in complete isolation from the Chinese heartland, creating bizarre and beautiful objects and then poof, disappeared. Some theorists blame natural disaster, others point to conquest, and some just throw their hands up and say, aliens. The lack of written records makes everything worse. We don't even know what they called themselves, let alone why they had a thing for bug-eyed masks the size of refrigerators. And while we're at it, who were they depicting with those masks? Gods? Kings? Mythical creatures? Hallucinations from prolonged exposure to mercury fumes? The unsettling scale and design suggests something ceremonial, but the exact rituals remain locked behind 3,000 years of silence. Even now, digs at Sanxingdui continue to produce increasingly baffling results. Recently uncovered gold masks and jade offerings hint at a belief system we can't decode, a mythology we don't share, and a people who manage to be both central to and completely missing from the Chinese historical narrative. It's as if an entire alternate version of ancient China was playing out in the shadows, flamboyant, enigmatic, and casually rewriting everything we thought we knew. A civilization that didn't just go missing, it hid in plain sight. Speaking of hidden things, some secrets don't need civilizations to be lost. Sometimes all it takes is one emperor, one tomb, and a few hundred rumors about rivers of mercury and deadly booby traps. Before we slip any deeper into the rabbit hole, quick pause. If this kind of mystery is your thing, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next secret we dig up. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it right now? Are you unraveling ancient enigmas from your desk at noon, or lying awake at 2 a.m. wondering what else we've buried and forgotten? You're not alone out here. The purpose of the Qin Shi Huang Mausoleum's traps. If Indiana Jones ever had to cancel a dig, it'd be this one. The tomb of Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China, unifier of the warring states, and professional overachiever, is not just a burial site. It's a death wish, wrapped in legend, buried under a mountain, and allegedly booby-trapped with enough ancient paranoia to make a Bond villain blush. While the Terracotta army mere meters from the tomb has been extensively studied and obsessively photographed, the actual mausoleum? Still sealed, still untouched, still very possibly full of traps. Why? Because the ancient texts basically say, hey, don't open this unless you like dying horribly. Sima Qian, the famous Han historian, described the mausoleum in vivid detail. Flowing rivers of mercury, crossbows set to fire automatically, ceilings encrusted with pearls representing the night sky. A literal underground empire, designed not just to preserve Qin Shi Huang's body, but to maintain his power in death. And you thought Egyptian pharaohs had ego problems. The mercury bit is particularly fun. Modern soil analysis has confirmed unusually high levels of mercury around the tomb mound, suggesting that yes, there might actually be rivers of toxic metal snaking through the underground palace. As if that wasn't enough of a health hazard, there's always the possibility that ancient engineers really did install mechanical traps, still primed after 2,000 years, just waiting for someone to get curious. So why hasn't anyone cracked it open? 2 reasons. 1, excavation technology still isn't advanced enough to explore the tomb without potentially destroying it or everyone inside. 2, there's the growing suspicion that maybe, just maybe, the ancients meant for this to stay sealed, as if some things aren't buried because they're lost, but because they were never meant to be found. And really, can you blame them? If you went to the trouble of conquering 6 kingdoms, inventing legalism, and turning your empire into an eternal autocracy, wouldn't you want to haunt the future from a deluxe subterranean fortress? But Qin Shi Huang's paranoia didn't die with him. It lives on, baked into the walls of his tomb, seeping into the ground through possible rivers of poison, and echoed in the terrified respect with which archaeologists still circle his resting place. They've mapped it with radar, they've measured the toxic air, and they've decided, maybe, not yet. But don't get too comfortable, because the past has a funny way of resurfacing. And the next mystery isn't buried underground, it's forged in bronze, still sharp enough to cut through 2,500 years of silence. The impossible swords of Jian and Fuchai. Let's set the scene. It's a regular Tuesday in 1965, and a team of Chinese archaeologists is digging through a waterlogged tomb in Hubei province. They're expecting the usual some pottery shards, a few bones, maybe a bronze spoon if they get lucky. What they find instead is a sword. Not just any sword, mind you. A gleaming, untarnished, razor-sharp weapon, still capable of drawing blood after more than 2,000 years buried in mud. Oops. They call it the Sword of Jian, and it has absolutely no right to exist in the condition it was found. This thing is from the spring and autumn period, around 500 BC, and yet it shines like it was forged yesterday. No rust, no pitting, no decay. Just perfect craftsmanship and the gleeful mockery of modern metallurgy. Jian, the king of Yue, supposedly wielded this beauty himself, although how many times he got to show it off is anyone's guess. The blade is etched with delicate, almost smug geometric patterns and inscriptions in ancient script, casually identifying itself as the Sword of the King of Yue. It's basically an ancient flex, a caption in weapon form. And then there's the Sword of Fuchai, Jian's nemesis ruler of Wu and part-time tragic figure. His sword, also unearthed in near-perfect condition, shares the same impossibly sophisticated design. Both weapons are made from a complex bronze alloy that resists oxidation and corrosion in ways that still stump scientists. Tin, copper, a splash of lead, sure, those were the ingredients. But the exact metallurgical recipe? Still MIA. Modern researchers have tried to reverse engineer the swords, with all the enthusiasm of kids trying to take apart a UFO. They've run X-rays, conducted compositional analysis, and even built digital models. But the mystery remains. How did ancient Chinese metallurgists know how to produce alloys so stable, so finely balanced, that they could sit in a damp tomb for 2 millennia and come out looking like premium weaponry? Some theories suggest high-temperature furnaces, controlled cooling techniques, and knowledge passed down through highly guarded guild secrets. Others just shrug and say, well, ancient people weren't stupid, which is true, but also doesn't help explain the difference between this and, say, the average rust bucket you find in medieval Europe. There's also the question of intent. These swords weren't just tools of war, they were status symbols, symbols of divine favor, possibly even ceremonial relics. The sword wasn't just meant to kill, it was meant to last. And somehow, it did. But here's the kicker. We've only found a handful of these indestructible swords, which begs the question, were these masterworks a one-off? Were they made by some lost metallurgical genius who forgot to write down the recipe before falling into obscurity? Or was this part of a broader, forgotten science of metallurgy that vanished with its last practitioners? It's not just a mystery of metal, it's a mystery of memory. These blades didn't just survive time, they survived history's attempt to forget them. Silent, sharp, and gleaming in defiance. Of course, it wouldn't be ancient China without at least one metaphorical dragon in the room, and in this case, we mean actual dragons. The origin of Chinese dragons. You've seen them coiling through clouds, dancing through festivals, painted across scrolls, and carved into temple walls. The Chinese dragon isn't just a mythical beast, it's an institution. Majestic, imperial, cosmic, and completely impossible to explain. Unlike their Western cousins, who hoard gold, breathe fire, and generally act like angry lizards with gambling problems, Chinese dragons are sophisticated, almost philosophical creatures. They control the weather, bless emperors, and symbolize balance and authority. But here's the mystery. Where did they come from, and how did they get so popular? The first known dragon-like depictions in China date back to the Neolithic period. That's right, people were doodling dragons on pottery long before they figured out how to smelt bronze. Some of the oldest examples, like the pig dragon sculptures of the Hongshan culture, look like, well, pigs with spiraled tails, cute, vaguely draconic, but still, a far cry from the celestial serpents that would eventually define the concept. So what happened? Did the dragon evolve naturally from a mix of totemic animals, snake, deer, fish, eagle, into one supreme composite creature? That's the prevailing theory, but it still doesn't quite explain how the dragon leapfrogged every other mythological beast to become the national symbol. And here's where it gets weirder. Chinese dragons don't just evolve, they mature. Early dragons are crude and squat, but by the time of the Han Dynasty, they're elegant sky serpents with 5 claws, flowing manes, and the moral authority of a philosopher king. Somewhere between 3000 BC and 200 AD, this animal got a cultural upgrade and nobody left a user manual. Scholars have suggested all sorts of things: meteorological explanations, tribal iconography, astronomical alignments, even psychedelic hallucinations. One theory argues that the dragon was a mythologized version of the alligator, or perhaps the python, both found in ancient southern China. Another claims the dragon represents the Milky Way, a living, writhing river across the sky. And then, there's the ever-popular theory, power. The dragon emerged not because it was real, but because it was useful. You can do a lot with a dragon. Emperors did. They adopted it, wrapped themselves in it, made it their personal brand. Divine right of rule sounds so much more convincing when there's a dragon involved. Dragons legitimized authority, scared the peasants, and turned weather into divine communication. But all this still leaves us with one enduring puzzle. Why dragons? Why this creature? Why did an imaginary sky serpent outcompete tigers, bears, lions, and everything else that might have impressed an ancient crowd? No one really knows. Which is, perhaps, the most dragon-like thing of all. They soar above explanation, slither through symbolism, and remain just out of reach, both real and unreal. And speaking of ancient things that shouldn't be as advanced as they are, how about some prehistoric farmers who apparently figured out rice agriculture before it was cool? The Hemudu culture's advanced rice cultivation. You probably don't think of 5000 BC as a good time to be an innovator. No electricity, no wheels, no Postmates. But someone forgot to tell the Hemudu people that because while most of humanity was still figuring out how to not starve, they were already planting rice like absolute professionals. The Hemudu culture, discovered in the 1972 near Hangzhou Bay, existed from around 5000 to 4500 BC. That's 6 or 7 millennia ago, give or take a revolution. And yet, their waterlogged settlements preserved something most archaeologists only dream about: tangible, preserved rice paddies. Yes, actual paddies. With irrigation ditches, with hose made from bone and wood, with signs of rotation and careful field management. The Hemudu weren't just playing around with rice, they knew rice. Which brings us to the question that ruins every good archaeological story. How? How did these supposedly primitive people develop such an advanced agricultural system so early in human history? Most models of agriculture assume a slow, painful climb from, oops, I spilled some seeds, to, hey, we should plant these on purpose. But the Hemudu seemed to skip several levels. They built stilt houses above the wetlands, managed water flow, and grew strains of japonica rice that would eventually feed half the continent. Their tools weren't random, they were standardized, sharpened, sometimes even decorated. In other words, they weren't just growing rice. They were designing agriculture. And then there's the social side. Advanced farming usually means surplus. Surplus means storage. Storage means someone has to guard it. And suddenly, you've got hierarchy. But oddly enough, there's little evidence of extreme social stratification in Hemudu society. No obvious kings, no giant palaces. Just efficient farmers doing their thing and, apparently, doing it better than everyone else for miles. Of course, this opens the door to conspiracy theorists who love to throw around words like lost civilization and Atlantean rice lords. But even serious scientists have to admit it's weird. Either the Hemudu had access to some now forgotten agricultural knowledge, or they independently reinvented sophisticated farming in a swampy corner of ancient China while the rest of the world was still learning how not to die in winter. And then, as mysteriously as they emerged, they faded. Around 4,500 BC, the Hemudu culture disappears from the archaeological record, likely due to rising sea levels or flooding. But they left behind paddies that rewrote the history of agriculture, and questions that still ferment quietly beneath the surface. Speaking of structures buried in mystery, how about some prehistoric pyramids in China that shouldn't exist, might exist, and definitely make people nervous? The prehistoric pyramids of China. Somewhere in the dusty back rooms of Chinese archaeology, there's a topic people treat like a family scandal. You know the kind everyone knows it exists. Nobody talks about it in polite company. And if you bring it up at a professional dinner, expect awkward silence and a sudden interest in the weather. That topic? The alleged pyramids of China. Yes, pyramids. As in, pointy, mysterious, eerily symmetrical structures that tend to appear in ancient civilizations like mushrooms after a rainstorm. Except these ones aren't in Egypt or Mesoamerica. They're in Shaanxi province, hidden in the misty foothills outside Xi'an, cloaked under decades of government farming projects and bureaucratic shoulder-shrugging. The story starts with old military maps, traveler accounts, and blurry black and white photos from World War II pilots. American airmen flying over central China in the 1942nd claim to have seen massive, white pyramidal structures rising from the landscape like ancient forgotten gods. One pilot described a pyramid larger than the Great Pyramid of Giza, just casually sitting there, collecting moss and secrets. Cue the conspiracy theories. For decades, Western researchers begged for access. Chinese officials either denied the pyramids existed or redirected inquiries to officially recognized burial mounds, smooth, grassy hills that, to be fair, do kind of resemble pyramids if you squint. But here's the twist. Those grassy hills? Some of them are tombs, imperial ones. And some are so off-limits that even Chinese archaeologists can't get permission to dig. Which is understandable, because if there are ancient pyramids under those hills, true, deliberately constructed, mathematically aligned pyramids, it would upend everything we think we know about prehistoric Chinese architecture. Suddenly, we'd be forced to ask all the uncomfortable questions. Who built them? Why? With what labor force? And why do they so eerily resemble structures on the other side of the planet? Mainstream archaeologists, naturally, take a more grounded approach. They suggest the pyramid theory is just a misinterpretation of burial mounds, that the symmetry is coincidental, that any resemblance to Mesoamerican or Egyptian pyramids is more about human beings loving triangles than ancient transoceanic cultural exchange, which, fine, people do love triangles. But the inconvenient truth is this: aerial photos exist. Satellite scans show distinctly geometric shapes, some with 4 sides and flattened tops. A few are perfectly aligned to cardinal points. Some are enormous, hundreds of feet tall, and curiously ignored in every official guidebook. And then there's the agricultural cover-up, quite literally. Many of these mounds have been intentionally covered in vegetation, terraced, planted with trees, or integrated into farmland. Is this ecological restoration, national preservation policy, or something a bit more cautious? Whether the Chinese pyramids are misunderstood mounds or something far more ancient and unexplained, one thing is certain: they don't want to be found. They've buried themselves under layers of history, politics, and plausible deniability. They sit there, smugly geometrical, daring someone to prove them real. But if you're looking for things that actually disappeared, not just hid in plain sight, let's take a detour to the ancient kingdom that vanished into thin desert air. The disappearance of the Loulan Kingdom. The Taklamakan Desert is not a place designed for second chances. It's the kind of place where footprints disappear behind you in minutes, where cities vanish without ceremony, and where civilizations go to be erased. Which is exactly what happened to Loulan, a once thriving kingdom that hugged the edge of the desert and then disappeared so thoroughly that even its ghost seems hesitant to speak. Loulan was a Silk Road oasis town, strategically nestled between empires, mountains, and commercial dreams. In its heyday around the 2nd to 4th centuries AD, it was a crucial node in the world's most important ancient trade network. Merchants passed through bearing silk, jade, spices, and, unfortunately, political agendas. Loulan balanced precariously between China, the Xiongnu, and other steppe powers, doing its best impression of a small fish in a shark tank. Then, somewhere in the 4th century, Loulan simply ceased. Early 20th century explorers like Sven Hedden and Aurel Stein stumbled across what little remained: sand, swallowed ruins, broken walls, scattered relics, and a mummified woman with high cheekbones and haunting eyes, nicknamed the Beauty of Loulan. Her hair was still intact. Her clothes still clung to her fragile frame. She had been dead for over 3,800 years. But Loulan itself? Dead barely 1,600. What killed it? The theories range from climate change to river diversion to good old-fashioned conquest. Some say the Tarim River shifted course, leaving the city without water. Others believe it was sacked, erased for political reasons, then swallowed by the desert like a state-sanctioned disappearing act. Satellite imagery shows traces of roads, buildings, and canals. But on the ground, the desert offers no explanations. It gives back only bones, pottery shards, and the occasional ancient shoe. A whisper of a civilization that once connected east and west and then got ghosted by history. And the spookiest part? Loulan isn't the only one. The entire Taklamakan is rumored to hold lost cities, entire networks of trade and culture buried beneath shifting sands. Every so often, a new set of ruins pokes out from the dunes, as if reminding us that the desert forgets nothing, it only waits. But while Loulan slipped quietly into legend, some ancient relics refuse to die. Some even defy natural law. Just ask the corpses still lounging around Mawangdui in suspiciously good condition. The secret of the Mawangdui tomb's preservation. It's one thing to be remembered after death. It's another to look better at 2,000 years old than most people do after a long weekend. Welcome to Mawangdui, home of the most suspiciously well-preserved human remains in ancient China. Specifically, Lady Di. also known as Xinzui. She died around 163 BC. She still has soft skin, flexible joints, recognizable fingerprints, and a smugly intact digestive tract that included her last meal, melon seeds. Her veins are still red. Her organs are still, well, there. No embalming fluid, no ice. Just whatever arcane magic was happening in the Han Dynasty at the time. Her body was discovered in the 1972nd, inside a nested coffin system buried deep in a watertight tomb. She was wrapped in 20 layers of silk, submerged in a mysterious reddish fluid, and surrounded by layers of charcoal and white clay. It was like she had been mummified by a committee of alchemists, engineers, and obsessive-compulsive undertakers. Scientists have spent decades trying to replicate this level of preservation. They've analyzed the fluid, no, it's not mercury, studied the environmental factors, cool, humid, and sealed like a sarcophagus within a sarcophagus, and reverse-engineered the tomb's construction. But no one has managed to recreate the exact conditions that kept Lady Di in such unnervingly good shape. And here's the twist. Her tomb wasn't unique. Other Mawangdui burials her husband, her son, were also well preserved, though not quite at her level, which means this wasn't a fluke. It was a process, one lost to time, and possibly buried along with the morticians who invented it. Was it chemistry? Geometry? Necromantic intuition? We may never know. What we do know is that while Egyptian mummies dry out and shrivel, the Chinese elite of Mawangdui went out in style, moist, pristine, and borderline unsettling. And this wasn't about spiritual resurrection. This was about earthly permanence, a desire to remain, to persist, in the face of rot and ruin. The Han weren't preparing to rise again. They were planning to be admired. But don't admire too closely, because the next mystery is built into the mountain, carved into legend, and possibly not from this earth. It's got iron pipes, it's got alien vibes, and it absolutely should not exist. The Baigong pipes, iron pipes of Mount Baigong. Ah, yes, ancient China's most metal mystery, literally. Nestled in the remote emptiness of western China, near the shores of Qinghai Lake and a saltwater body known as Tuosu Lake, stands Mount Baigong. At first glance, it's just another unassuming, windswept hill in the middle of nowhere. But go a little closer, and you'll find a cave. Go into the cave, and you'll find pipes. Rusty, ancient, iron pipes sticking out of the rock, as if someone tried to install plumbing in a place with no one to bathe. They're called the Baigong pipes, and they're one of those mysteries that manages to be fascinating, frustrating, and slightly ridiculous all at once. Some of the pipes are embedded deep into the rock of the mountain. Others are strewn around like forgotten parts of an alien IKEA set. They vary in size, but many are surprisingly uniform. Some even lead directly into the salty waters of Tuosu Lake, as if part of some kind of long-abandoned filtration system or, if you ask the internet, a Martian spaceport. Yes, Martians, or ancient astronauts, or time travelers. Pick your flavor of forbidden knowledge. Because here's the thing, no one can really explain what these pipes are doing there. Chinese scientists have studied the pipes. The iron is real. The structure is odd. Some of the pipes have been dated tentatively to around 150,000 years ago, which is a problem, because that predates known Chinese civilization by a comfortable 100,000 years or so. It's like finding a functioning coffee machine in a Neanderthal cave. Something doesn't add up. So then the skeptics arrive. Some say it's natural, just iron-rich magma seeping through rock fissures and oxidizing over time into pipe-like formations. A geological coincidence that just happens to look like early industrial infrastructure. Sure, because nature's been known to install plumbing before. Others argue the pipes were made by a now-lost ancient people with advanced metallurgical knowledge. If so, it would be one of the earliest known uses of smelted iron hundreds of centuries before such a thing should have been possible. You know, just casual Iron Age technology, in the Paleolithic. But the deeper problem is this. No one wants to touch it. The area is remote, access is restricted, and the investigations are few and far between. It's as if the mystery has been gently placed in a drawer marked "too weird to deal with." And so it stays half buried in the desert, half buried in official silence. Meanwhile, the pipes are slowly degrading, but their story is only getting stronger. In the absence of firm data, myth rushes in like floodwater. Theories bloom, theories die. And the Baigong pipes remain rusty, real, and wrong in all the right ways. If those pipes were part of some long-lost infrastructure, then we must ask, what else did ancient builders know about construction in places they had no business reaching? Because our next mystery isn't underground, it's hanging precariously off cliffs and mountainsides. The construction of the Great Wall's more remote sections. Everyone knows the Great Wall of China. Tourists hike it, postcards feature it, drones swoon over it. But here's what they don't tell you in the gift shop brochure. The really interesting parts of the Great Wall aren't the clean, restored tourist traps. They're the forgotten, crumbling, God-forsaken stretches that snake through deserts, mountains, and terrain so brutal it makes modern engineers sweat just thinking about it. Those sections, many of which are inaccessible even today, weren't built with the help of helicopters, bulldozers, or coffee breaks. They were constructed using whatever the builders could carry on their backs, using hands, rope, and determination forged in misery. And yet, there they are, standing, somehow, centuries later. Which leads us to ask the obvious question, how? Let's be clear, some parts of the wall make sense. You've got packed, earth segments from the early days, built on relatively flat terrain, strategically placed to protect farming regions. But then there are those remote highland walls, those cliff-hugging monstrosities of stone, where each brick had to be transported dozens of miles across impossible terrain. There are sections that seem more symbolic than strategic, winding through landscapes that no army would reasonably attack from. So again, why build there? And how did they even manage to? Some theories say these were built as deterrents, psychological warfare in stone, a warning etched into the mountainside. Others argue that these segments marked borders more than they served military functions. Still, none of this explains the sheer logistical madness of dragging heavy materials through mountain passes and ravines in eras when the wheelbarrow was considered fancy. Then, there's the craftsmanship. Even in remote regions, the masonry is precise. Some bricks are keyline fired to exact specifications. In certain areas, local stones were shaped to fit like puzzle pieces, no mortar required. This isn't slapdash survival architecture. This is intentional. This is political will made tangible, an emperor's ego stretching over the earth. And let's not forget the human cost. Tens of thousands of workers died building the wall. Some were conscripts, some were criminals. Some were just unlucky enough to live near a construction site. The wall is often romanticized as a monument to unity, but it's also a graveyard without markers. A monument to forced labor, suffering, and imperial paranoia. So yes, it's still there, but we still don't know the full story of how it got there, especially those cliffside segments that no one visits. They weren't made for tourists. They weren't even made for time. They were made because someone, somewhere, said, "It must be done." And no one dared say no. Still, for all its scale, the wall has one thing it lacks: religion. For that, you'll have to look further north, where goddesses watch from forgotten temples, and the wind howls through stone statues with eyes that might still be watching. The purpose of the Hongshan culture's goddess temple. Before Confucius, before the dynasties, before even writing, there were people in the northeast of what we now call China, carving statues of a goddess whose face still stares back at us, calm, alien, maternal, unsettling. Welcome to the Hongshan culture. It's about 6,000 years old, and no one really knows what they were up to. At the heart of it all, is the goddess temple. Discovered in the 1982 in what is now Inner Mongolia, this ceremonial complex revealed something astonishing. Large clay statues, some nearly life-sized, of a seated female figure with narrow eyes, a flat nose, and hands folded peacefully in her lap. She looks like she knows something you don't, and she's definitely not telling. The structure itself is circular sacred geometry for the Neolithic mind. Around her were found jade objects, pig bones, and what might be primitive altars. Some of the jades were shaped into dragons, others into mysterious blobs with unclear functions. What's clear is this: the Hongshan weren't just farmers and toolmakers, they were thinking bigger. They were practicing something like religion. And they were building temples long before temples were supposed to exist. This throws a massive wrench into the traditional model of Chinese religious history, which says organized religion came much later. The Hongshan had no writing, no recorded mythologies, but they had iconography, they had worship, and they had design. So what was this goddess? A fertility figure? An earth mother? A local spirit elevated to divine status? Maybe all of the above. Maybe neither. Her calm expression and consistent depiction suggest reverence, but not necessarily the kind we'd recognize. She doesn't command fear, she doesn't demand blood, she simply sits, watches, waits. Even more confusing are the jade artifacts associated with her. Some are shaped into coiled dragons, a motif that predates written history, but survives today in Chinese iconography. Are we looking at the birth of the Chinese dragon myth? Was it divine? Symbolic? Just good design? And why did this culture so advanced in art and spirituality disappear? We don't know. The Hongshan faded mysteriously, leaving behind only their silent statues and jade dragons. No texts, no tombs, just a temple on a windy hill and a goddess who refuses to explain herself. But that's the thing about ancient mysteries. They don't whisper, they stare. And this one is staring straight into the murky legends of submerged cities, where entire worlds may lie beneath still waters, waiting to be rediscovered. The disappearance of the waterlogged cities of Sichuan. Some cities are lost to time, others to conquest. And then there are those that simply slip beneath the surface, swallowed whole by water, legend, and silence. In the misty basin lands of Sichuan, locals have whispered for centuries about ancient cities now resting under lakes, waiting, supposedly intact, beneath the still surface. These are the waterlogged cities of Sichuan, places that, if real, didn't just fall apart, but quite literally sank. The stories vary, depending on who you ask. One version tells of sprawling cities submerged during catastrophic floods. Another insists they were abandoned during wars, swallowed not by nature, but by engineered water diversions. Yet another, more poetic, claims the cities sank because their people grew arrogant, and the heavens punished them with rising lakes. Moral lesson: don't build temples too close to the gods. The lakes themselves are real. Some are artificial, others ancient and naturally formed by tectonic shifts or glacial melt. In particular, high-altitude lakes in remote forested valleys have long been the focus of speculation. Divers in more recent years have reported stone blocks, half-buried pillars, and even broken rooftops below the waterline, but nothing definitive, nothing scientific. Just enough to tantalize, and to make you wonder if someone is hiding more than just debris. Here's the frustrating part: there's no consistent archaeological record. Some claim a few ruins were found and quietly removed. Others say everything's still there, but the lakes are too deep, or the sediment too thick, or the political red tape too suffocating to allow proper investigation. Add in the occasional discovery of pottery shards in lake sediments, or reports of ancient roads that lead directly into the water, and you start to see why people won't let the idea go. Then, there's the issue of China's long, contentious relationship with water. Flood myths run deep in Chinese culture, both metaphorically and geologically. The Great Yu, the legendary flood controller, is said to have tamed the rivers and built canals that saved early civilization. But what if he wasn't just dealing with seasonal floods? What if entire cities had already disappeared by the time he showed up? Environmental changes, especially in regions like Sichuan, where seismic activity and rainfall are both generous and unpredictable, could easily have created lakes where towns once stood. A landslide here, a damming of a tributary there, and suddenly your thriving community is an underwater myth. Of course, the human brain can't resist imagining Atlantis-style ruins, majestic archways, treasure-filled temples, statues looking up from the lakebed like drowned gods. That's probably not what's down there. But then again, no one's gone deep enough to prove otherwise. And so the mystery sits half buried under silt, half formed in our imagination. But if you're into things that shouldn't be possible for their time, let's surface for a moment. Because the next mystery is made not of stone, but of jade, carved with such impossible precision that modern experts are still trying to figure out how. The impossible precision of Liangzhu culture jade carving. Long before bronze, long before dynasties, long before anything even resembling a complex state system, the Liangzhu culture was making jade objects that defy explanation. Imagine a society living in the marshy lowlands of the Yangtze River Delta around 3,300 to 2,300 BC. They build homes on stilts, they grow rice, they fish, and then, somehow, in between all this subsistence survival, they decide to master the art of carving jade, a stone so hard it can't be cut with metal tools, only with abrasion, only with time. Lots and lots of time. And yet, the Liangzhu people didn't just carve jade, they sculpted it, intricately, symmetrically, with angles so clean and curves so consistent that modern machining would struggle to replicate them without high-tech lathes and diamond drills, except the Liangzhu had neither, at least, not that we know of. They left behind Kong tubes, mysterious square tubes, with circular hollows, decorated with haunting abstract faces, possibly deities or spirits. And by discs perfectly round jade circles with no obvious function but plenty of ritual weight. They weren't decorative, they were ceremonial, sacred, and possibly metaphysical. They weren't made to be worn. They were made to be buried. Some of these pieces are so technically refined that they force a rethink of what Neolithic cultures were capable of. You look at them and think, there's no way this was done with sand and string. But that's all we've got. No writing, no tools, no jade workshops discovered with step-by-step guides. Just the finished products, smooth, polished, eerily perfect, and totally out of place. Theories abound. One suggests that the Liangzhu had hundreds of artisans working full-time for years on a single piece. Another speculates that they had access to harder abrasives, perhaps a proto-form of corundum, but again, no evidence, just speculation. Some researchers have even joked half-seriously that aliens must have done it, because nothing screams, "we give up," like blaming extraterrestrials. And it's not just the carving, it's the scale. Some of these objects are massive, weighing dozens of pounds, not exactly pocket-sized trinkets. Transporting them required coordination, intention, and presumably a whole lot of reverence. These were not utilitarian objects. They were sacred symbols, power condensed into stone. The Liangzhu also had cities' urban planning, drainage systems, artificial platforms suggesting a high level of socio-political organization. But their sudden rise and equally sudden disappearance, perhaps due to floods or climate collapse, only deepens the mystery. They vanished, but their jade stayed, untouched, undeciphered. If we're being honest, the jade carvings don't look like something from prehistory. They look like something outside history, like someone cheated, and maybe they did. Or maybe, once upon a time, Human ingenuity didn't need written language or metallurgy. It just needed patience, ritual, and a whole lot of sand. Still not convinced something weird is going on in ancient China? Then allow us to present 8,000 terracotta reasons to lose sleep over just how much one man was willing to prepare for the afterlife. The mystery of the terracotta army's uniqueness. At first glance, it looks like overkill. And then you realize no, this was restraint. Qin Shi Huang, China's first emperor and eternal champion of why die when you can rule the underworld, decided that when he went, he wasn't going alone. So he built an army. Not a symbolic one. Not a few statues to look good at funerals. No, he commissioned thousands of life-sized warriors, each with unique facial features, postures, and expressions. Infantry, cavalry, charioteers, officers, archers, every rank, every role, all rendered in clay, real weapons included. You know, just in case the afterlife had enemy factions. We've all heard of the Terracotta Army, discovered in 1974 by farmers digging a well, but familiarity doesn't blunt the absurdity of it. These aren't mass-produced toys. These are handcrafted, sculpted, and painstakingly detailed figures complete with armor, hair buns, and even fingernails. No two are alike. They were arranged in battle formation, with real crossbows and bronze swords sharp enough to use today. This wasn't a funerary gesture. This was a military operation. So how did they do it? Some archaeologists believe artisans used modular techniques, interchangeable limbs, torsos, and heads to save time. But the individuality of the figures remains baffling. Some faces seem tired, others smirk. Some stare blankly, while others seem mid-conversation. This isn't just art. It's psychology in baked clay. And then there's the paint. Yes, these figures were once fully painted vibrant, colorful, vivid, but when exposed to air, the pigments flake off almost instantly. Conservators are still trying to figure out how to preserve what's left, because apparently 2,000-year-old polymers still hold secrets modern chemistry can't crack. But the big question isn't how it was done, it's why. Why build this army? Why so lifelike? Why so human? Was it fear of the afterlife? An obsession with control? A statement to the universe that death itself was just a change in command? And here's the creepiest part. This is just the welcome mat. The actual mausoleum, the emperor's tomb, remains sealed, guarded by tales of mercury rivers and mechanical traps. The Terracotta Army? It's just the security detail. So yes, Qin Shi Huang might be dead, but his army stands ready, watching, waiting. And if that doesn't give you chills, wait until you see the script that started it all scratched into bone, written by fire and whispered by oracles. The Oracle Bone Inscription's Origin and Evolution. Before there were emperors, before Confucius or Laozi had the chance to wax philosophical, before characters were printed on silk scrolls or carved into stone tablets, there were bones. Burned bones. Cracked shells, tortoise plastrons inscribed with the questions of kings and the nervous hopes of ancient diviners. These are the oracle bones of the Shang dynasty, and they're the closest thing we have to a psychic hotline from 3,000 years ago. At first glance, they look like random scrawls, broken animal bones with jagged notches and crude carvings. But under the right lighting and enough scholarly obsession, they reveal a language in formation, the earliest known Chinese script, fully formed and unnervingly sophisticated. Not just rudimentary scratchings or pictographs, but complex ideograms, syntax, and a logic that directly connects to modern Chinese writing. In short, they didn't start small, they started complete, which immediately raises a problem. Languages don't do that. They don't just pop out of nowhere fully functional, with grammar and vocabulary intact like Athena from Zeus's forehead. They evolve, slowly and painfully, through generations of trial and error, except, apparently, when they're scratched into the bones of oxen and tortoises. The process was theatrical. A king, or more likely his priestly entourage, would pose a question. Will the harvest fail this year? Should we go to war with the neighboring tribe? Is the queen's headache divine punishment? A diviner would then heat the bone until it cracked. The pattern of the cracks was interpreted, and the response, yes, no, maybe, it's complicated, was inscribed on the bone alongside the question. Future kings could refer back to the predictions and results, building a proto-bureaucracy of divine micromanagement. The astonishing part isn't just the script's complexity, it's the consistency. Thousands of bones, many of them excavated in Anyang, display repeating forms of the same characters, the same structure. This wasn't a mess of graffiti. This was a system. And yet we don't know where it came from. There's no precursor, no Rosetta Stone of proto-writing, no gradual build-up from random markings to formal text. It's as if someone lost the entire first half of the novel and just started reading at chapter 12. Did earlier scripts exist on less permanent materials, wood, bamboo, silk that simply disintegrated over time? Maybe, but the absence of evidence is conspicuous. It's like finding a perfectly written essay with no drafts, no notes, no pencil smudges. Either the Shang invented writing in one supernatural burst of cognitive brilliance, or we're missing a very large chapter of linguistic history. What we do know is that these bones give us more than just language. They give us a glimpse into the paranoid mind of the ancient state, obsessed with omens, compulsively ritualistic, deeply bureaucratic. Every crack in every bone was a mirror into the anxieties of a ruling class that treated the divine like a civil servant one they could consult, scold, or bribe. And here's the kicker. Oracle bone script didn't fade into obscurity. It evolved. Slowly, the characters became more abstract, more stylized, until they resembled the brushstrokes we recognize today. Which means the words on your modern dumpling menu are distant cousins of these ancient divinations. But for all we've learned from them, there's still a gap, a black box of origin. Who made the first mark? Who decided fire and bone were the right tools for prophecy? We don't know. But we do know this. Once people start inscribing fate into the skeletons of animals, it's usually because they're trying to move mountains. And speaking of that, the moving mountains phenomenon in ancient engineering. Let's be honest, moving mountains should be a metaphor. It should be a phrase we throw around to describe impossible tasks. But in ancient China, it's uncomfortably close to literal. Because again and again, history reports tales of impossibly massive stones, carved steles, and entire hillside tombs being constructed with stones that shouldn't have moved, let alone been lifted, carved, and transported over hostile terrain. It starts with the basics. Gigantic stone slabs weighing dozens, sometimes hundreds of tons. Found at royal tomb sites, temple complexes, and sometimes just randomly standing in the middle of nowhere like a giant saying, "Yes, I was here." The largest examples rival those in Egypt or South America. And yet, there's little documentation of how they were moved, no blueprints, no ancient instruction manuals left behind, just stone, silently defying physics. Take, for instance, the stone stele bases found at Ming Dynasty tombs, some so massive that they were clearly carved from single pieces of rock, and then somehow transported across miles of uneven ground, rivers, and hills. And these were ceremonial structures, not fortifications. They were made to impress and confuse, and they succeed on both counts. Theories abound: ramps, rollers, ice roads, giant teams of laborers. All are plausible, none are satisfying. Because no matter how many ropes and pulleys you throw at the problem, the logistical math starts to scream. The workforce required, the food needed to support that workforce, the time, the coordination, the sheer will to say, "Yes, we will move this 150-ton block because the emperor says it looks cool next to his tomb." And sometimes, It wasn't just about the size, it was about the placement. How do you haul a giant stone up a mountain? How do you lower it into a precisely carved pit without cracking it? Some structures show signs of being fitted so perfectly that you can't even slide a blade of grass between the stones. That's not brute force, that's precision, and that's terrifying. Even stranger are the abandoned attempts. At certain quarry sites, you'll find half-finished monoliths, massive stones that were clearly in the process of being cut, but never moved. It's as if someone started the job and then suddenly realized, wait, this is insane, and left the stone to bake in the sun for 2,000 years. Of course, one explanation is simple. Massive amounts of human suffering, forced labor on an industrial scale, and that's likely part of it. But even cruelty has logistical limits. Even emperors can't bend granite with pure authority. So what if something else was at play? Lost engineering knowledge? Ancient materials, science? A forgotten set of tools that allowed for precision cuts, minimal friction, and the kind of leverage modern cranes dream about. We don't know. And every time someone proposes a solution, the stones just sit there, unimpressed. Which brings us to a marvel that not only still functions, but functions perfectly, as if ancient engineers had somehow glimpsed future hydrology textbooks and decided to improve upon them. The secret of the Dujiangyan irrigation system's longevity. When you build something over 2,000 years ago and it still works without anyone having to call a plumber, you're not just a good engineer, you're basically a wizard. Enter Dujiangyan, the irrigation system constructed in the 3rd century BC during the late Warring States period. It's not just a marvel of ancient engineering. It's a monument to the kind of practical genius that makes modern infrastructure look like a toddler's Lego set. Dujiangyan sits on the Min River in Sichuan province, and unlike most ancient projects that involve dams and control gates, it doesn't use a dam at all. Instead, it cleverly redirects the river using levees, weirs, and channels manipulating the natural flow rather than trying to stop it. That's right, the ancient Chinese weren't just moving water. They were negotiating with it. The system diverts floodwaters during the rainy season and supplies irrigation during the dry season. It does this by splitting the river with a man-made levee called the fishmouth, directing part of the flow into an inner channel. Then there's the flying sand weir, which allows excess water and silt to drain naturally back into the main channel, avoiding buildup. It's essentially a self-cleaning, self-regulating system. You couldn't design something that elegant with a whiteboard and 3 MIT interns. What's more impressive? It's still in use. Today, literally, the same system still supports agricultural production in Sichuan, providing water to tens of thousands of square kilometers. Meanwhile, modern dams last, 50, 60 years before falling apart? Maybe 100 if they're lucky? Dujiangyan has been trucking along since before the Roman Republic was a thing. So how did they do it? The project was reportedly the brainchild of Li Bing, a local governor and hydraulic engineer who understood both the river's fury and the needs of the local population. But where did Li Bing get this knowledge? Trial and error? Divine inspiration? A secret PhD in fluid dynamics 2,000 years before such a thing existed? The truth is, we don't fully understand the mathematical models that would have been needed to design Dujiangyan. The builders had no cement, no steel, and definitely no spreadsheets. Just rock, bamboo, and an uncanny understanding of how water moves. Some scholars have suggested they may have used models' miniature test rivers constructed to observe flow patterns. Others believe the design was passed down orally for generations, but there's no firm record, just the result, which continues to perform silently, efficiently, with no complaint. And in a way, that makes it even more mysterious, because the more it works, the more it refuses to explain why it works. A system that survives for millennia doesn't just answer questions, it generates them. And speaking of preservation that borders on the supernatural, how about a body that refuses to rot, wrapped like royalty, and waiting beneath silk for 2,000 years, with all her secrets still sealed in her skin. The identity of the sleeping beauty of Xinjue. In a museum drawer, she would look like a mistake. Too smooth, too pink, too alive. But she's not a mannequin. She's not a wax replica. She's Xinjue, also known as Lady Dai, and she's been dead since 163 BC. Just don't say that to her face. She might blink. Unearthed from tomb number 1 at Mawangdui in Changsha, Lady Dai's corpse is arguably the most well-preserved human body from the ancient world. Her skin is supple, her veins are intact. Her joints are still flexible. Scientists were reportedly able to bend her limbs. Her internal organs are present, plump, and disturbingly functional looking. Her stomach even contained her final meal, melon, consumed just hours before death, and you thought the Egyptians were good at mummification. But here's the thing. We still don't know how this happened. No mummification fluid, no desiccation, no preservatives we can easily replicate. Just a deeply sealed tomb, a perfectly humidified microclimate, a mysterious reddish fluid, and layers upon layers of silk. That's all we have to explain. The biological equivalent of a time capsule with a pulse. Lady Dai wasn't an empress. She wasn't a warrior. She wasn't a myth. She was the wife of a nobleman, a bureaucrat in the Western Han dynasty. By all accounts, she lived a relatively comfortable life. Records suggest she suffered from high blood pressure, diabetes, clogged arteries, liver disease, and a fondness for banquets, a lifestyle both relatable and, ultimately, fatal. And yet, in death, she achieved the kind of immortality alchemists only dreamed of. Her tomb was a miracle of ancient engineering. Nested lacquered coffins, airtight ceiling, strategically placed charcoal and white clay layers that regulated temperature and moisture. This was not a hastily buried aristocrat. This was a planned suspension of decay. Whether they understood the chemistry behind it or simply stumbled onto the perfect preservation conditions is still debated. But the outcome? Inarguable. And yet, for all the attention paid to her body, her identity remains frustratingly vague. Who was Xinjue, really? What did she believe? Why was so much effort poured into her burial? Was she beloved beyond death, or merely part of a larger ritualistic performance meant to honor elite families? The inscriptions, the artifacts, the medical reports, they all give us fragments. Her cosmetics were still intact. Her silk robes unfurled like new. Her face, when viewed from certain angles, seems eerily at peace. She's become a symbol not just of death, but of the denial of death, a physical rebuttal to time. But here's the creepiest part. She's not alone. Other Han burials have surfaced with nearly identical preservation techniques, though none quite as eerie or pristine. So whatever was going on at Mawangdui wasn't an isolated event. It may have been a practice, a science, a secret, one we forgot. And while Lady Dai sleeps on, unwilling to decay, we're left staring at the body like it might suddenly sit up and explain itself. But it won't. She won't. She's made her statement just by existing. And if that hasn't unsettled you enough, the next mystery deals in things more symbolic than corporeal, enigmatic bird-headed figures from a culture teetering on the edge of legend and historical reality. The significance of the Birdman. Figures from the Erlitou culture. The Erlitou culture is like the friend who shows up uninvited to a party and insists they were always on the guest list. Allegedly dating from around 1900 to 1500 BC, Erlitou is often positioned as the material evidence for the semi-legendary Xia dynasty, the one we still aren't sure actually existed. Which makes Erlitou either the smoking gun or a very elaborate coincidence. And then, there are the Birdmen. Among the bronze artifacts and foundations of palace complexes uncovered at Erlitou, a strange motif pops up. Humanoid figures with bird-like features, beaks, wings, talons, sometimes perched, sometimes mid-stride. Not exactly the kind of decor you'd expect from early urban China. These Birdman images don't come with explanations. They don't appear in ancient texts. They just exist, quietly defying any attempt to rationalize them. So what were they? Deities? Shamans? Astral projections? Costume wearers with a flair for the dramatic? Theories range from religious symbolism to mythological guardians to stylized depictions of elite classes dressed in ceremonial bird masks, because nothing says ruling class like dressing up as an oversized hawk. But their repetition suggests importance. These weren't one-off curiosities. They appear in high-status burials, ritual contexts, and some of the earliest bronze artworks in Chinese history. Which means whoever or whatever these birdmen represented, they were central to the early two worldview. The symbolism of birds in early Chinese thought is rich. Birds connect heaven and earth. They migrate. They see what humans can't. In shamanistic traditions, bird costumes were thought to allow communication with the divine. Were these figures early ancestors of the phoenix myths? Prototypes of divine messengers? Or were they merely fashionable metaphors lost in translation? What makes it even more tantalizing is that Erlitou shows signs of a surprisingly advanced society, planned urban layouts, roads, bronze smelting workshops, ritual altars. These weren't primitive villagers doodling in the dirt. This was an organized, structured civilization. And yet, the only beings they immortalized in bronze were birdmen. It's as if the entire belief system of this culture revolved around a symbol we can't quite decode. And because the Erlitou left behind no writing, just bones, pots, and birds, were left guessing at meaning through form. The figures look confident, permanent, as though they were never meant to be explained, only obeyed. And if these strange creatures were gods, or spirits, or leaders, then we're staring into a mirror of early Chinese religion before the texts, before the codification, when cosmology was still raw and wild and half animal. But the birdmen remained silent. And so we move deeper into the earth, into the dark, poisoned silence beneath the first emperor's tomb, where rivers don't flow with water, and a forgotten empire may be buried in metallic venom. The underground palace of Qin Shi Huang's mausoleum. The Terracotta army, with all its eerie, lifelike splendor, is just the lobby. The real show lies beneath a massive earthen mound a short distance away, Qin Shi Huang's final resting place. But no one's ever seen it, because no one dares open it. Historical texts, particularly the records of the Grand Historian, describe a subterranean palace constructed to mimic the world above. Entire cities, celestial ceilings inlaid with gems, and vast maps with flowing rivers of mercury. Let's take a moment to appreciate that last part, rivers of mercury, not as a metaphor, as in actual, toxic, liquid metal coursing through the tomb. And here's where it stops being legend. Soil tests conducted around the mound have revealed abnormal levels of mercury far higher than natural concentrations, which means the ancients may have actually done it. They created a map of China in the underworld, complete with flowing mercury rivers. To say Qin Shi Huang was a control freak would be an insult to control freaks. So why haven't archaeologists opened the tomb? Because it's sealed tight under layers of booby traps, pressurized earth, and death. Ancient texts also mention automatic crossbows rigged to fire on intruders. Yes, you read that right. Booby-trapped crossbows. Qin didn't just want to be buried in peace. He wanted to be buried in fortified peace. There's also the technological issue. We don't yet have the means to excavate the site without risking catastrophic damage. The artifacts inside could be vaporized the moment fresh air hits them. The tomb itself could collapse. And let's not forget the small matter of mercury poisoning. It's not a metaphor, it's a hazard. So for now, the tomb remains closed. An unopened chapter of history, potentially filled with wonders, horrors, or just really impressive celestial maps. The greatest archaeological mystery in China, and perhaps the world, is sitting in plain sight and no one dares crack it open. But here's the poetic irony. In life, Qin Shi Huang conquered death by unifying China. In death, he haunts history with silence. His mausoleum isn't just a tomb. It's a message. Some things are not meant to be disturbed. Still, if you think his empire was the only one to vanish without explanation, then let's talk about the Dian Kingdom, a civilization that left behind gorgeous bronze relics, but no goodbye note. The disappearance of the Dian Kingdom. Yunnan Province, nestled in China's southwest, is the kind of place that feels like it's always hiding something: mountains wrapped in fog, ancient trade routes swallowed by jungle, and a deep, slow silence that makes you wonder what used to be there. And once upon a time, what used to be there was a kingdom, the Dian. The Dian Kingdom flourished around the 4th century BC to the 1st century BC, long enough to build an identity, mint some coins, and produce some of the most beautiful and perplexing bronze artifacts ever found in China. But then, like a breath held too long, it was gone. No war epic, no famous last battle, no culturally traumatic fall from grace, just silence. The first real clue the Dian had even existed came not from texts, but from bronze drums. And no, not musical instruments, though they might have doubled as such, but elaborately decorated. Cast metal masterpieces depicting scenes of daily life, warfare, animal hunting, and strange rituals. What stood out was their precision and detail. The Dian bronzes didn't just show action, they told stories. Scenes of warriors in formation, processions of people carrying offerings, stylized frogs and oxen that hinted at complex symbolic systems. One particularly intriguing motif? Decapitation, lots of it. Heads being presented ceremonially, perhaps in a display of power or sacrifice. If that doesn't scream, please pay attention to us, nothing does. And yet, the Han Dynasty scribes barely mention them. A few vague references to southern tribes, nothing definitive. So we're left to reverse engineer an entire civilization from the fragments they left behind. That's like trying to reconstruct an opera from a few scattered notes scratched on a napkin. What we know, if we can trust the archaeology, is that the Dian were master metalworkers. Their bronzes suggest not just technological sophistication, but cultural depth. They didn't simply borrow styles from the Central Plains. They had their own thing going, their own iconography, their own rhythm. And they weren't isolated. The location of Yunnan made the Dian Kingdom a node in larger regional trade networks. They likely interacted with other cultures, possibly Indian, Southeast Asian, and of course, Han Chinese. So what happened? One theory is absorption. That the Han Dynasty, expanding its influence southward, simply swallowed the Dian like a python digesting a particularly artistic deer. No great war, no dramatic sacking. Just slow bureaucratic digestion. Another idea? Ecological disruption. Changes in climate or agriculture that made sustaining a centralized power impossible. Or perhaps internal collapse, factionalism, religious upheaval, a crisis of leadership. But because the Dian left no written language, no epic poems, no funerary inscriptions boasting of conquests or divine favor, we're left with a civilization that was extraordinary in form and entirely silent in message. It's like walking into a museum and seeing an entire wing dedicated to a painter no one remembers. The art survives, the name does not. And perhaps the strangest part? No one seems particularly eager to change that. Dian bronzes are displayed in museums, admired by scholars, and then quietly shelved from popular memory. The kingdom remains a footnote, beautiful, bloody, and absent. But if the Dian bronzes taught us anything, it's this. Metallurgy can be more revealing than memory, and sometimes the sharpest truth lies in a reflection. So let's stick with that theme. Because the next mystery is all about ancient Chinese mirrors, bronze discs that do more than just reflect your face. They reflect impossibility, the impossible metallurgy of ancient Chinese mirrors. Imagine this. You're standing in front of a bronze mirror made over 2,000 years ago, not polished steel, not coated glass. Just bronze and alloy of copper and tin forged in smoky kilns, hammered and shaped by hand. And yet, when you look into it, you see yourself clearly, too clearly. Some of these mirrors don't just reflect, they shine, with a clarity and smoothness that rival modern materials, despite the absence of industrial polishing equipment. Even stranger, some of them create optical illusions. The so-called magic mirrors project patterns onto walls when light bounces off their surface, revealing hidden images not visible on the reflective side. It's as if someone encoded secret messages into the physical properties of the bronze itself. These are not trinkets. They are technical marvels. Most date from the Han Dynasty, though earlier examples exist, and they come in a variety of sizes and designs. Decorative backs feature dragons, phoenixes, inscriptions invoking longevity or virtue. The front, a mirror surface so flat, so flawless, that it reflects without distortion. The metallurgy behind this? Still not fully understood. Yes, we know they used bronze. But how exactly did they achieve such precision in casting? What tools were used for polishing? Some surviving texts reference grinding powders, maybe quartz, maybe hematite, but no one has replicated the full process with success, especially not the optical trickery of the magic mirrors. Here's the kicker. When scientists examined these mirrors with modern technology, X-ray fluorescence, microscopy, 3D scans, they found microscopic irregularities on the reverse side that corresponded to the projected patterns. Somehow, the artisans created variations in bronze thickness that affected light reflection without disturbing the mirror's visible surface. In other words, they were manipulating the molecular structure of a metal alloy using techniques we can barely imitate now. And yet, these craftsmen had no formal understanding of optics, no concept of photons, no laser labs. Just tools, fire, and patience, and apparently, an intuitive understanding of light behavior. Were these mirrors ceremonial? Possibly. Many were found in tombs, but their utility was real. They were used by men and women alike. Some even contained inscriptions like, "May you be always radiant," which is sweet, until you realize you're holding a device that can literally project secret symbols in sunlight. So, how did this knowledge arise? Was it accidental discovery, refined through generations? Was there a school, a guild of ancient optical engineers? Or was this another casualty of lost knowledge, a body of craftsmanship passed down orally, until one day someone forgot the formula and the light went out? We don't know. What we do know is that you can't just explain this away as primitive polishing. Something else was happening. A confluence of science, art, and mystery. And while mirrors reflect the world around them, they also distort. They create illusions. And perhaps that's what makes the next mystery so compelling: structures hidden below cities, dark, narrow, and just ambiguous enough to make you wonder what else might be down there. The purpose of the shugo, underground passages, in ancient cities. Under the quiet courtyards of China's ancient cities lie shadows, narrow stone corridors, subterranean tunnels, twisting mazes that whisper of escape routes, secret meetings, and something stranger. These are the shugo, underground passageways, whose existence is well documented, but whose purpose remains frustratingly elusive. They're found in cities both large and small, sometimes beneath palaces, sometimes under entire street grids, sometimes they lead nowhere. Sometimes they connect major administrative buildings, suggesting official use. Other times, they dead-end abruptly, or veer off in confusing, almost dreamlike angles, less like functional infrastructure and more like psychological warfare with a chisel. The most straightforward theory? Military use. In times of siege, secret tunnels allowed officials or royals to flee the city undetected. They may also have served as troop deployment corridors or ways to ferry supplies covertly. Logical, neat, boring. Because the problem with that theory is the over-engineering. Many of these tunnels are too elaborate for mere escape routes. Lined with stone bricks, reinforced, sometimes carved with symbols, or lined with niches. Who puts decoration in a panic tunnel? Others propose ritual use, that they were part of underground ceremonies or spiritual architecture meant to reflect cosmological beliefs. Some lead to altars or crypts, suggesting more than practical function. There's even evidence that in some cities, these tunnels aligned with astronomical directions. Now you're talking. And then there's the conspiracy camp always ready. Tunnels for secret societies, hidden routes for necromancers and Taoist sorcerers. Subterranean networks built not just beneath cities, but across them entire underground worlds, lost now or deliberately erased. Unprovable? Yes. Tempting? Absolutely. One theory even suggests the tunnels were symbolic, that walking through them was an act of ritual purification or social control, a physical descent before re-emergence into society, a rebirth of sorts. That would explain the sheer number found beneath temples, as well as their strangely claustrophobic layouts. But perhaps the most unsettling possibility is the one no one wants to say out loud. Maybe they were meant for something not human, something smaller, or bigger, or stranger. No definitive evidence, of course. Just unsettling dimensions, winding paths, and a pervasive silence that resists narrative. Modern urban planning rarely integrates these tunnels. In fact, many are destroyed or ignored during construction. A shame. Because what little we've found raises too many questions to bury. What were they hiding? Or more disturbingly, what were they hiding from? And if that isn't enough mythological dread for you, wait until you hear about the floods that nearly erased everything and the legends that say they were punishment from heaven itself. The great flood legends in Chinese mythology. Every civilization has its flood myth. The Mesopotamians had Gilgamesh, the Hebrews had Noah, and the Chinese, well, the Chinese went full epic. Enter the Great Flood. A cataclysm so devastating it nearly wiped out all of ancient humanity, or at least enough to justify the reorganization of the entire cosmos. And like all great ancient disasters, it left behind more questions than answers. The central figure is Yu the Great, a culture hero somewhere between an engineer, a demigod, and a really stressed-out civil servant. According to the myth, the floods raged for decades, washing away homes, drowning fields, and generally making a mess of civilization. The people cried out for salvation. The gods shrugged, and Yu, either out of duty, brilliance, or supernatural favor, decided to fix it. But here's the twist. He didn't dam the rivers. He channeled them. He dug canals, opened floodplains, rerouted waterways. He worked for 13 years, walking past his own house 3 times without going in, because apparently, when you're saving the world, dinner with the family can wait. The flood was tamed. The land was reborn, and Yu became the founder of the Xia dynasty, which, as we already know, might not have existed. The story has moral weight. Yu's triumph isn't just hydraulic, it's ethical. He earns his right to rule not through conquest, but through service, sweat, humility, and a total lack of vacation time. It's the political origin story China needed, divine favor expressed through infrastructure. But here's where the waters get muddy. Did this flood actually happen? Some scientists point to geological evidence of massive flooding events in the Yellow River Basin, particularly around 1900 BC. Sediment layers, disrupted soil profiles, and signs of large-scale water flow suggest something big and wet occurred. Some even argue this event could correlate with the mythical flood. But the problem is scale. The myths describe a flood so massive it lasted generations, affected all the known world, and nearly unraveled society. The evidence we have suggests something more localized, disastrous, yes, but not necessarily world-ending. So, was the myth an exaggeration? A memory of multiple smaller disasters stitched together into one cosmic punishment? Or was it allegory, a metaphor for the chaos before centralized power, the unruly wild before the mandate of heaven gave us order and bureaucracy? Another theory suggests the flood myth was political propaganda. By elevating you as a civilizing hero, the early dynasties could claim divine lineage and engineering legitimacy. It wasn't about the water. It was about the story of overcoming it. Floods, after all, don't leave behind witnesses, just mud, which is perfect if you're trying to overwrite history with narrative. And yet, the flood persists, not just in myth, but in ritual. Annual ceremonies, poems, and dynastic inscriptions often invoke the fear of flooding. Even today, the psychology of water control is hardwired into China's governance, from dams and levees to the Three Gorges Project. Yu's legacy isn't just legend, it's policy. Still, the line between myth and memory remains blurred. Did the flood happen? Maybe. Did it matter? Absolutely. Because whether or not the water rose, the fear of drowning still shaped a civilization. But if you think that's dramatic, let's take a turn toward the truly bizarre, where the dead don't just rest, they hang from cliffs in boats. Welcome to the Ba people, and their unnervingly vertical take on the afterlife. The origin of the Ba culture's unique burial practices. In the mist-choked cliffs of Sichuan and Chongqing, coffins hang like forgotten prayers suspended in crevices, perched on narrow ledges, wedged into caves hundreds of feet above the ground. These are the cliff burials of the Ba people, and they raise an obvious question. Who looks at a sheer rock face and thinks, perfect place to store grandma? The Ba were an ancient ethnic group who flourished in the upper Yangtze River basin during the late Bronze Age and into the early imperial periods. Their culture has mostly vanished, absorbed, displaced, or simply lost, but their funerary habits refuse to be ignored. Cliff burials, boat-shaped coffins, sometimes carved into the rock, sometimes literally hanging on wooden beams. The logistics alone are mind-numbing. First, the obvious. How did they get them up there? Ropes? Scaffolding? Trained monkeys? Some of these coffins are located hundreds of meters above the valley floor, in places no sane person would dare climb with a living body, let alone a dead one. The terrain is treacherous. The drop is lethal. And yet, someone went to incredible effort to stash their dead where birds dare and humans shouldn't. Why? One theory is spiritual elevation. The higher the body, the closer to heaven. Death was not an ending, it was an ascent. Another theory is protection. Up there, scavengers and floods couldn't reach. The cliff became a vault, a divine safe deposit box. A third possibility? Social status. The higher your coffin, the more impressive your afterlife. Literally dying on top. And the boat-shaped coffins? That's another layer of mystery. Some believe they represent a journey to the afterlife, a ferry across the river of death. Others suggest the Ba were a riverine people who simply saw boats as natural vessels for both life and death. Or maybe it's symbolic, a soul adrift waiting for the next shore. Inside these coffins, we find grave goods, pottery, weapons, ornaments. Not much in terms of writing, not even many bodies. Many of the coffins have been looted, damaged by erosion, or simply disintegrated over time. What's left are fragments, wood, bones, bronze, dangling in the wind like the last notes of a forgotten song. Modern efforts to preserve these sites are complicated by the terrain and the delicate state of the coffins. Some have been removed and displayed in museums. Others are left to decay, too dangerous to retrieve. Locals often refer to them with awe or casual unease. They are relics of a people no one fully understands. Were the Ba practicing something truly unique, or part of a broader, now lost mortuary tradition in the mountains of southwest China? Were these burial sites sacred pilgrimage locations, or simply the most remote real estate available? We may never know. The Ba left no libraries, no temples, no manifestos. Just wooden boats suspended in stone air, slowly disappearing. And if you think cities are safe from this vanishing act, think again. Because just beyond the dunes, there are whispers of entire metropolises lost to the sand, swallowed by the shifting soul of the Taklamakan Desert. The lost cities of the Taklamakan Desert. They call it the Sea of Death, and the Taklamakan Desert has earned the name. A place so hostile, so bone-dry and wind-scoured, that even seasoned explorers check their wills before entering. But once, this unforgiving wasteland may have hosted entire cities, bustling outposts of the Silk Road, now buried under waves of sand. The legends are plentiful. Traders who wandered off the path, never to return. Whole caravans swallowed by sudden sandstorms. Mirages of towers shimmering on the horizon. But then came the real clues. Collapsed walls, poking through dunes, ancient texts referencing now vanished kingdoms, and occasionally an actual archaeological discovery that turns myth into, well, damn. One of the most famous sites is Nia, a once prosperous city-state whose ruins reveal an unexpectedly complex society. Stone houses, wooden beams, textiles, Buddhist shrines, contracts written in Korosti script. The people there lived and traded with cultures across Central and South Asia, blending Chinese, Indian, Persian, and Greco-Bactrian influences into a cosmopolitan smoothie of ancient life. But Nia was just one dot. There are dozens, maybe hundreds of rumored lost cities scattered across the Tarim Basin. Some may lie under dunes, preserved like Pompeii in sand instead of ash. Others may be gone entirely, swallowed and compacted under centuries of geological pressure. The big question is, what happened? Climate change is a prime suspect. Rivers that once fed oases dried up. Forests became scrubland. Settlements that depended on water had no chance. As trade routes shifted and political tides changed, people moved on, leaving their homes to the desert's mercy. But it's not just about abandonment. Some sites show signs of violent ends, burnt beams, toppled statues, hastily buried valuables, raiders, uprisings, apocalyptic droughts, or something stranger. Adding to the mystery is the incredible preservation. The arid conditions, mummified bodies, protected fabrics, and preserved wooden structures, allowing us to see what kind of boots they wore, what meals they ate, what contracts they signed. It's all there, if you can find it. And yet, despite the tantalizing finds, vast stretches of the desert remain unexplored, some due to politics, others due to terrain. Much of the Taklamakan is just too hostile for sustained excavation. And so the cities wait, buried, invisible, alive only in rumor. Maybe they're still out there. Maybe they're already underfoot. But the sand is patient, and secrets buried in deserts tend to stay buried until one day the wind shifts. The mystery of the flying saucer pictograms at Helan Mountains. Let's take a brief detour into the mountains, a place where the air gets thin, and so does the boundary between recorded history and outright hallucination. The Helan Mountains, located in what is now Ningxia, are home to a vast gallery of ancient rock art. Thousands of petroglyphs, etched and pecked into stone faces, have survived the millennia. Animals, humans, symbols, hunting scenes, battle lines. But among all this understandable chaos, there are a few anomalies. Specifically, the ones that look like flying saucers. Yes, you read that correctly. Ancient Chinese UFOs. Or at least, shapes that very much resemble the classic saucer dome silhouettes we've come to associate with aliens, government denials, and late-night cable specials. Circular discs with trailing lines, strange helmeted figures, patterns that evoke propulsion rather than decoration. They're out of place, out of context, and outrageously anachronistic. Of course, they aren't labeled. No handy inscription saying, "And then the sky gods descended." Just the etchings, which is enough for some to proclaim this as evidence of ancient alien contact. These are the usual suspects: people who believe aliens helped build the pyramids, taught humans metallurgy, and possibly ran a consulting firm in the Neolithic era. And while the theory may seem far-fetched, it's also difficult to disprove outright when you're staring at a 5,000-year-old carving that looks suspiciously like a spacecraft. Skeptics have offered more grounded explanations. Perhaps the discs are stylized depictions of the sun or celestial phenomena. Maybe they're ritual symbols, or early versions of drums or wheels. The problem is, these interpretations often require just as much imaginative stretch as the alien theory, especially when the figures appear to include humanoid shapes with what seem to be helmets or antennae. Some carvings even depict scenes that could be read, if you're willing to squint and surrender to a bit of narrative bias, as contact moments, humans facing strange floating objects. Others show figures in positions that suggest awe, submission, or fear. Are they looking up at gods, or looking out at visitors? And why here, of all places? The Helan Mountains aren't just any mountains. They've been a sacred region for numerous cultures over thousands of years. The Xiongnu, the Tanguts, even early Han settlers all left traces here. If these images were part of a spiritual or cosmological language, we're missing the key to decode it. But if they were record stone snapshots of actual events, then we're left confronting a possibility that rewrites the entire human story. The truth? We don't know. We might never know. The pictograms don't speak. They just sit there, etched into cliffs that have watched the sky longer than we've been able to write about it. So, were they watching something? Or simply imagining it? What we do know is that strange technology leaves its mark not just in legend, but in the materials themselves. And speaking of material sophistication, let's talk about prehistoric pottery, so advanced it's still baffling scientists, starting with some suspiciously perfect black ceramics. The precise dating of the Longshan culture's black pottery. Imagine, if you will, a piece of pottery so thin it sings when you tap it. A dark, shimmering vessel, black as obsidian, smooth as glass, so perfectly formed it could be mistaken for a piece of minimalist modern art. Now imagine it was made 5,000 years ago, with no electric kilns, no digital calipers, and no room for error. Welcome to the world of Longshan black pottery. The Longshan culture, which flourished from around 3000 to 1900 BC in the central plains of China, left behind some of the most technically baffling ceramics of the Neolithic world. These weren't just pots. These were statements, status symbols, possibly ceremonial, possibly utilitarian, almost certainly impossible. The process used to create these jet black, high-fired, ultra-thin vessels is still not fully understood. What we do know is that the firing required temperatures of at least 1000 degrees Celsius, a feat that would have required precise control of oxygen levels, fuel supply, and kiln construction. Which is a long way of saying, not the kind of thing you'd expect from a culture with no metallurgy, no writing, and supposedly no engineers. And the results? Astounding. Some vessels are less than 1 millimeter thick. The surfaces are polished to a mirror finish. No glaze. Just raw ceramic, perfectly formed and burnished. When held to light, they almost glow. And here's the kicker: they're uniform. Not just one-off anomalies. These ceramics were mass-produced across Longshan sites, which suggests either an organized guild of master potters or a secret they took to the grave. And that's the real mystery, because pottery, Like language, usually evolves. It starts crude and gets better. But with Longshan, it's as if they started at the top and then lost it. Later cultures couldn't replicate the technique. Even modern efforts struggle to match their combination of strength, lightness, and surface finish without synthetic additives and electric kilns. Some archaeologists have speculated that the ceramics were the work of a highly specialized cast artisans who trained their entire lives to make these vessels. Others suggest they had access to unique clay deposits or secret firing techniques. Still, there's no evidence of dedicated workshops. No toolkits, no instruction tablets, just the pots, perfect and mute. There's even an odd pattern in their chronology. Longshan pottery appears to peak early, then gradually decline in quality toward the end of the culture, as if something was forgotten. As if the people who knew how to make them stopped or left. Did the knowledge die out? Was it hoarded? Was it considered sacred? We don't know. But the pottery remains tucked away in museum cases, still whispering secrets from a civilization that should have had no business knowing how to do any of this. Of course, when it comes to ancient secrets, nothing holds them tighter than a royal tomb, and few tombs are more tantalizing than those we haven't even found yet. Like, say, the final resting place of one of China's most powerful emperors still missing, still silent, still very much off the map. The lost tombs of famous emperors, for example, Emperor Wu of Han. Emperor Wu of Han was not a subtle man. His reign, 141-87 BC, saw the expansion of the Han dynasty's borders, the consolidation of Confucian orthodoxy, the invention of state monopolies, and a foreign policy best described as aggressively curious. He wasn't just a ruler, he was a one-man nation-building tornado, so you'd think we'd know where he was buried. We don't. What we think we know is that his tomb, known as the Maoling Mausoleum, lies somewhere near present-day Xingping in Shaanxi province. It's enormous, a pyramid-shaped mound visible from miles away. But here's the twist. It hasn't been excavated, not fully, not properly, and we have no idea what, if anything, is still inside. The official story is that it's too risky, that excavating the tomb could damage its contents, that the technology isn't ready, which is fair, if a little convenient. But the unofficial whispers suggest something stranger. Why don't we know more? Why does one of the most significant rulers in Chinese history have a tomb that feels ambiguous? Historical texts describe the tomb as a literal underground palace complete with treasure, weapons, concubines, alive when buried. Of course, ancient royalty had rules, and possibly priceless manuscripts. Emperor Wu was obsessed with immortality, and it's said he sent expeditions to find the mythical Penglai island. If his tomb was meant to preserve him in death, you can bet it was designed like a celestial fortress. And yet, despite satellite imaging and limited site surveys, there's no detailed record of what's inside. No one's cracked it open. No one's walked the inner halls. It remains intact, untouched, a sleeping dragon of imperial ambition, which is impressive and suspicious. Other emperors are missing entirely. Some were buried in secret, others in places now lost to erosion, construction, or simply history's apathy. The first emperor had the Terracotta army. Tang emperors had massive mausoleums, but a few like Wu remain locked in place, frustratingly unconfirmed. Why? Maybe we don't want to find out. Maybe it's better this way, monarchs wrapped in mystery, their legacies intact because we haven't pried them open yet. Or maybe we're afraid of what we'll find. A body missing. A tomb looted. A coffin. Empty. Whatever the reason, the lost tombs of China's emperors stand as monuments not just to power, but to absence. They remind us that history isn't just what we know, it's what we can't know. What refuses to be found? What waits beneath earth and stone to outlast every attempt to understand it? And just when you think you've come to terms with the limits of human craftsmanship, you'll meet an ancient bridge so sophisticated it makes even modern civil engineers shake their heads and possibly their blueprints. The impossible bridges of ancient China. For example, Anji Bridge's construction. Bridges are supposed to be functional, boring, and predictable. That's the whole point. They connect point A to point B without sending you plummeting into the river below. But occasionally, a bridge decides to be more than just a slab of stone and mortar. Occasionally, a bridge decides to look at the laws of physics and say, "Cute, but let me show you something." The Anji Bridge, also known as the Jiaohe Bridge, is one of those bridges. Located in Hebei province and completed sometime around the year 605 AD, it's considered the oldest open spandrel stone arch bridge in the world. That's a technical term for looks deceptively fragile but is secretly a structural genius. Most ancient bridges were built with solid arches, relying on sheer mass to stay upright. Not Anji. Its open spandrel design includes carefully cut stone ribs that distribute weight in a way modern engineers admire, with the kind of reverence usually reserved for sacred relics or Nobel laureates. The result? A bridge that's lighter, longer, and stronger than anything else of its era. Let's put this into context. This bridge was built during the Sui dynasty, at a time when most cultures were still figuring out how to align their wheels. It predates much of Europe's best medieval architecture by centuries. It has withstood wars, floods, earthquakes, emperors, and at least one attempted rebuild that, wisely, never happened. And it's still in use today. The genius behind the bridge was an engineer named Li Chun. His plans were so ahead of their time that for decades, modern architects thought the design had to be flawed until they ran the numbers and realized it was, in fact, better than the systems they were teaching in class. But here's where things get mysterious. We have no surviving plans, no scrolls, no notebooks filled with nervous calculations and trial and error sketches, just the finished product. Li Chun is credited, sure, but how did he come up with it? Trial and error? Divine inspiration? A dream? There's no blueprint, just brilliance. Some believe he had access to earlier traditions of wooden bridge building and translated their flexible principles into stone. Others argue the design represents a leap, something closer to genius than evolution. And still others whisper that perhaps Li Chun wasn't alone. Maybe the bridge was the result of a lost engineering tradition, one with methods now forgotten. Whatever the origin, the Anji Bridge exists as a kind of quiet defiance against time, weather, and historical assumptions. It should have crumbled by now. It hasn't. It should have been replaced. It wasn't. Instead, it just stands there, 1,400 years later, like an old monk who figured out the meaning of life and decided not to explain it. And it's not the only ancient Chinese innovation hiding in plain sight. Take the Silk Road, for example. You've heard of it. You probably picture camels, merchants, and spice traders. But what if we told you that the real mystery isn't what happened on the Silk Road but how it started? The secret of the Silk Road's earliest trade routes. Everyone loves a good road trip, especially when it involves thousands of miles, several empires, and the occasional Mongol raid. The Silk Road has become a mythological highway in human history, a route not just of trade, but of transformation. But while the romanticized version starts with Zhang Qian in the Han Dynasty around 138 BC, the truth is far more fragmented and far more confusing. The question isn't whether the Silk Road existed, it's how early it really started. Evidence suggests that long before the Han officially sent envoys westward, people were already moving goods, ideas, and possibly diseases across Eurasia. Archaeologists have uncovered silk threads in Egyptian tombs from the 12th century BC. Chinese jade has been found in Bronze Age sites as far as Central Asia. And millet, yes, Humble millet shows up in European farming contexts long before it should. So what's going on here? Theories abound. Some suggest that early trade routes weren't so much roads as networks of desperate people looking for stuff. Hunter, gatherers, nomadic herders, river traders, each playing courier for goods that moved one painful step at a time across thousands of miles, like a transcontinental relay race with no batons and no finish line. Others think there were Proto-Silk Road's early trails blazed by prehistoric cultures who weren't civilized enough to write about it, but were certainly smart enough to trade bronze, spices, or exotic trinkets. These weren't empires doing business. These were communities following seasonal patterns, water sources, and rumors. Then there's the question of language. Communication across these early routes must have involved gestures, broken dialects, and lots of pointing. The fact that any trade happened at all is a minor miracle, and yet it clearly did. Glass from Rome, coins from Persia, cotton from India, all making their way east, west, and everywhere in between. What's missing is documentation. Ancient Chinese records don't really acknowledge pre-Han Silk routes. But absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. It's just a hole big enough to drive a camel caravan through. And if the archaeological finds are any indication, the flow of trade didn't begin with an emperor's decree. It began with curiosity, greed, wonder, the same things that still power global commerce today. And while the Silk Road eventually became a well-managed geopolitical artery, its origins are messy, organic, and deeply human, which is to say, completely mysterious. But for all the commodities that moved across ancient China, not everything traded was material. Some things were spiritual, esoteric, downright spooky, which brings us to one of the strangest mysteries, yet China's lost art of necromancy. The lost art of Daigu, Chinese necromancy. Necromancy. The word alone conjures images of robed figures, candle-lit rituals, and suspicious piles of animal bones. Most associate it with Western occultism, or maybe ancient Egypt if you're being generous. But ancient China had its own form of communing with the dead, and it was just as unsettling, elaborate, and misunderstood. Enter Daigu. Daigu literally means speaking on behalf. And in ancient texts, it refers to rituals performed by mediums, shamans, or priests who acted as mouthpieces for the dead. Not in the metaphorical, poetic sense, but in the possessed by your great-grandfather kind of way. The practice wasn't fringe, it was institutional. Royal courts employed mediums to contact ancestors before making decisions. Military campaigns were approved only after consulting the dead. Farmers delayed planting if the ancestors said the weather would be bad. In other words, half of China's ancient history may have been ghost-written, literally. The rituals varied. Some involved trance states, achieved through drumming, fasting, or herbal concoctions. Others required animal sacrifices, particularly dogs, which were seen as psychopomps, creatures that could guide souls between worlds. The medium would enter a state of possession, speak with the voice of the departed, deliver warnings, advice, or blessings, and then collapse, exhausted, spiritually rent. Of course, this raises more questions than it answers. Who trained these mediums? Were they born with the gift, or was it something you could learn like calligraphy, but with more screaming? Some texts describe Wu, a class of shamans who specialized in these rites. But others suggest the talent ran in families, passed down like a haunted heirloom. And then there's the moral ambiguity. Necromancy wasn't always welcomed. Confucian scholars, in particular, found it distasteful. Disturbing the dead for personal gain, incredibly unfilial. Taoists were split. Some embraced it as part of the broader search for immortality. Others condemned it as dangerous dabbling. Over time, Daigu was marginalized, then criminalized, then sanitized out of most official histories. which means what survives today is just a whisper fragments in bamboo slips, accusations in legal records, side notes in philosophical treatises. The rituals themselves are lost, the chants unspoken, the tools forgotten. Or are they? Every so often, tombs are uncovered with strange artifacts, mirrors, bone rods, jade rings, objects whose function isn't clearly religious or decorative. Could they be necromantic instruments? Could the dead still be waiting for someone to remember how to speak their language? We don't know, and maybe that's for the best. But what we do know is that when you stand before a tomb and see the stone lions guarding it stoic, silent, and vaguely menacing, you're seeing more than just decoration. You're seeing another kind of sentinel. The next mystery. Still watching. Still unexplained. The mystery of the Xi'an stone lions. If you've ever walked through an ancient Chinese tomb complex or temple and seen a pair of massive stone lions glaring at you like they know something you don't, it's not your imagination. They do know something you don't. Because these stone lions, especially the ones scattered throughout Xi'an, don't just mark sacred ground, they guard a mystery. Let's start with the basics. The lion is not native to China. You can go through the whole animal kingdom of ancient East Asia and you won't find wild lions stalking around the Yellow River. Which begs the question, why did they become one of the most dominant motifs in Chinese spiritual and architectural design? The official answer? Trade, cultural diffusion. When Buddhism spread into China along the Silk Road, it brought with it foreign symbols, lions among them. In India, lions were associated with royalty and divine power, especially as mounts of deities like Manjushri. So the theory goes, the Chinese adopted the lion as a guardian symbol, repurposing it as a cosmic bouncer for temples and imperial tombs. But there's a problem with that theory. The earliest stone lions in China, particularly those found in and around Xi'an, don't look Indian. They don't even look like lions. They're stylized, often bizarre, with almost canine features, exaggerated muscles, gaping mouths, and swirling manes that resemble clouds more than fur. These aren't realistic animals. These are something else. Some scholars suggest they may have evolved from local mythological beasts, combinations of tiger, dog, dragon, and imagination. The imported concept of the lion merged with native creatures like the pixiu or foo dog, producing a wholly original monster. But if that's the case, why such consistency across dynasties? Why were they always placed in pairs? Why one male and one female? Why with the same poses one paw on a cub or globe, the other on nothing? And then there's their placement. Stone lions are usually found at critical thresholds, temples, tombs, administrative buildings, always watching, always symmetrical, always positioned with disturbing precision, as if following a rulebook we no longer have access to. In Xi'an, the former capital of multiple dynasties, stone lions are everywhere. They flank the approach to the Qianling Mausoleum. They line the sacred paths of Tang emperors. They appear on bridges, gates, tombs, silent, heavy, and eternal. Some are massive. Others are worn down to the point of looking like melted dogs. But the presence is constant. Here's where it gets weirder. Some of the lions are found in remote spots, with no obvious structure nearby. No tomb, no shrine. Just a lion sitting in the middle of nowhere, weather-beaten and alone, as if guarding something that's no longer there or not visible to us. Locals tell stories, that the lions come alive at night, that they protect hidden treasure, that if you touch one the wrong way, bad luck will follow. Some are known as crying lions, believed to mourn lost emperors. Others are said to house spirits, waiting for their masters to return. Are these just stories? Maybe. But then again, these lions have outlived kingdoms, outlasted emperors. They've been struck by lightning, buried in floods, toppled by war, and still they sit, unblinking. So what were they really for? Guardians? Symbols of power? Or something more esoteric, ritual anchors, spiritual decoys, embodiments of forgotten deities? The answer lies buried beneath dynastic layers of symbolism, translation, and time. And if these lions stand as protectors between this world and the next, then the next stop in our journey takes us far beyond the physical into the realm of myth, immortality, and imperial desperation. Pack your sea legs. We're heading for Penglai, the Penglai Island legend and the search for immortality. Penglai. The name alone sounds like a whisper carried across the ocean. A mythical island of immortals, said to float somewhere off the eastern coast of China, shrouded in mist, unreachable by mortal means. The land where the 8 immortals dined, where magic herbs grew, where death forgot your name. It was the dream of emperors, alchemists, and anyone with a pulse and a fear of its expiration. And perhaps no one was more obsessed with Penglai than Qin Shi Huang. Fresh off uniting China through brute force and bureaucracy, the first emperor turned his attention to the next great task, cheating death. He dispatched entire fleets in search of Penglai, sending emissaries to sail east in pursuit of elixirs, sages, and the rumored gateway to forever. Spoiler alert, they didn't find it, but they did disappear, which, in true mystery fashion, only added to the legend. The descriptions of Penglai are remarkably consistent across ancient texts. White jade palaces, towers made of gold, trees that bore fruits of everlasting life. Time moved differently there. Wine refilled itself. The moon never waned, all very convenient, all deeply suspicious. Some texts claim the island was mobile, appearing and vanishing with the tides, accessible only to the pure of heart or the suicidally determined. Others hint that it wasn't an island at all, but a metaphor, a state of spiritual enlightenment reached only through asceticism and ritual. And yet, real attempts were made to find it. Not just Qin Shi Huang, but later emperors too. Han Wudi, Tang Xuanzong, even Ming sailors sailing far into the Pacific, hoping to glimpse that fabled shore. Sometimes they brought back strange plants. Sometimes they brought back maps. Sometimes they didn't come back at all. Modern scholars debate whether Penglai was a distorted memory of Japan, the Ryukyu Islands, or even Korea. Others say it was entirely fabricated, a utopia designed to justify imperial spending on doomed voyages. After all, you can't be held accountable for failure if your goal is literally unreachable. But Penglai wasn't just a destination, it was a symbol, a cosmic carrot, proof that heaven's rewards could be brought to earth if you were rich enough, powerful enough, and just a little bit lucky. And that's the dark heart of the legend, the way it reveals the desperation of those who believed it. Emperors building fleets instead of hospitals, alchemists feeding rulers mercury instead of medicine, scholars rewriting maps to justify ambition, all in pursuit of an island that might have been a hallucination shared across centuries. So, was Penglai ever real? Maybe, maybe not. But even if the island never existed, the longing certainly did. The fear of death, the hope for a shortcut, the willingness to trade ships, souls, and sanity for one more breath. But immortality doesn't always come from magical islands. Sometimes it comes from the strange persistence of language written in symbols no one else can read. Like the next mystery, hiding in the highlands of Yunnan, where the script still lives, but its meaning may be on its last breath. The disappearing script of the Naxi Dongba culture. Deep in the mountains of Lijiang, where stone-paved streets wind through villages older than some countries, there exists a script that shouldn't pass. It's called Dongba. It belongs to the Naxi people. And it is, depending on whom you ask, the last living pictographic writing system on Earth. It is also slowly, irrevocably dying. The Dongba script looks like the fever dream of an overworked cartoonist. Birds, suns, Humans, snakes, water all drawn with wild, expressive flair. It's not an alphabet. Not even ideographic in the way Chinese characters are. Each symbol is more like a conceptual explosion, a mix of literal meaning, phonetic sound, and spiritual metaphor, which makes translation a nightmare. A single Dongba glyph might represent the word for sun, the sound, a, and a reference to an old myth about a fire god all at once. Context is everything. Which wouldn't be a problem, except the only people who truly understood the context were the Dongba priests, and most of them are gone. Traditionally, Dongba was used for ritual texts, chants, invocations, cosmologies. The priests would perform elaborate ceremonies while referencing scrolls filled with these symbols, singing the words while gesturing to the images. It wasn't just reading, it was performance, religion, art, memory. There are over 1,000 known Dongba symbols. Some scholars claim there were once more than 2,500. But fewer than a dozen people alive today can claim to read it fluently. And even they disagree on the meaning of certain signs. Every symbol is a riddle. Every scroll a locked door. What's worse, the script was never standardized. Two priests might draw the same symbol differently. Some variations are artistic. Others reflect local dialects or secret meanings passed down within families, which is beautiful, but also disastrous for preservation. You can't save something that refuses to be pinned down. Attempts have been made. Museums have collected and scanned texts. Linguists have tried to codify meanings. Even AI models have been trained to identify recurring patterns. But without the cultural context, without the rituals and worldviews that birthed the script, it's like trying to understand a joke with only the punchline. And yet, Dongba endures. On walls, in paintings, in souvenirs sold to tourists who have no idea what they're looking at. There's a strange irony in it, a sacred, mystic writing system turned into decor. But that's how many scripts die not with a bang, but with a branding deal. So, was Dongba ever meant to be read widely? Or was it always meant to be ephemeral, a living script for a living ritual, fading as the breath of the priest fades? Maybe it's not disappearing. Maybe it's returning to where it came from. Either way, its silence echoes louder with every passing year. And yet, it leaves behind one last message. Language is only alive when someone believes in it. And just beyond those mountain villages, the waters begin again. Vast canals, ancient as empire, defying geography and time, still flowing, still mysterious, still impossibly engineered. The impossible waterways of the Grand Canal's earliest sections. If you ask modern engineers to build a canal connecting rivers that flow in opposite directions over mountains, through floodplains, and across nearly 2,000 kilometers of hostile terrain, they'll probably ask for a decade, $1 billion budget, and a solid support group. But if you asked ancient China, they'd just shrug, pick up some shovels, and make it happen with nothing but manpower, mud, and a disturbing amount of confidence. The Grand Canal of China is often referred to as the world's longest artificial waterway, which is impressive. But it's not the length that's the real mystery. It's the fact that the earliest sections were built centuries before they should have been possible. The canal predates the Roman aqueducts. It predates the medieval lock systems of Europe. It may even predate our understanding of why anyone would attempt something this ambitious, with no cranes, no steel, and no fallback plan. It began in fragmented pieces, sections built independently by early states like Wu and Qi around the 5th century BC. These weren't just glorified moats. These were sophisticated channels, some dozens of kilometers long, linking rivers and facilitating grain transport, troop movement, and the subtle art of telling neighboring kingdoms, "We're smarter than you." The engineering challenges were staggering. The Yangtze and Yellow rivers don't naturally want to cooperate. Their elevations differ, their flow directions are incompatible. Connecting them meant not just digging trenches but rethinking hydrology from scratch. And yet, somehow, early Chinese engineers figured out how to harness seasonal water flow, construct embankments, and build gradient adjustments, all without modern surveying tools. One of the biggest puzzles lies in the links section, a portion so early, so technically complex, that many experts still don't fully understand how it was executed. It involved redirecting rivers, managing silt accumulation, and stabilizing banks with locally sourced materials, all in an era where a compass was cutting-edge tech. And let's not forget the sheer labor involved. Tens of thousands of workers, organized in a time when centralized bureaucracies were still figuring out what paperwork even was. The level of social coordination required boggles the mind, and yet it worked. Not only did it function, it thrived. Crops were shipped, soldiers deployed, cities fed. So how did they do it? Some theorize that early Chinese societies developed a kind of empirical hydrology knowledge gained from generations of trial and error, encoded in oral tradition and passed down through specialized guilds. Others suspect lost technologies, forgotten measurement techniques, or simply a cultural obsession with water management so intense it birthed feats that bordered on miraculous. Because water wasn't just practical in ancient China, it was spiritual. The Tao flowed like water. Harmony was found in rivers. The mandate of heaven often came with irrigation rites. And yet, despite the philosophical beauty, the canal remains a brutal triumph of logistics. It doesn't care if you believe in it. It just flows through dynasties, through revolutions, through time. But if the Grand Canal was about movement, our next mystery is about stillness, silence. The unblinking mystery of stone pyramids rising from the fields not in Egypt, but in Shandong, where their very existence remains inconvenient. The mystery of the Shandong pyramids. When you hear the word pyramid, your mind probably goes straight to Giza, sun-baked limestone, pharaohs, and enough tourist foot traffic to wear down a mountain. But quietly, awkwardly, and with very little fanfare, China has its own pyramid specifically in the Shandong region, and they are a problem. A problem because they shouldn't exist. A problem because they're not fully acknowledged. A problem because they raise uncomfortable questions about what we think we know about ancient Chinese architecture and what we've been quietly told to forget. The pyramids of Shandong aren't just naturally shaped hills. They have angles, symmetry, layered stonework in some cases. They stand in fields, forests, and even under agricultural developments barely noticed, barely discussed. Some are attributed to ancient tombs, which would make sense if they weren't so large, so geometrically deliberate, and so obviously built for more than just burial. And yet, no one really talks about them. Official documentation is sparse, archaeological surveys are incomplete. You won't find glossy museum brochures about them or school field trips marching toward them with clipboards. In many cases, you'll find trees growing on top planted intentionally, perhaps as camouflage. Out of sight, out of mind. So what are they? The most mainstream theory is that they're burial mounds for high-ranking nobles from the pre-Qin period. Fair enough, China has plenty of those. But here's the issue. These Shandong structures are different. Larger, more angular. Some are aligned with cardinal directions. Some have subterranean chambers that suggest ritual complexity. Others have artifacts that don't match the expected cultural timeline. There are whispers that some of these pyramids are connected via underground tunnels, natural or man-made, no one can say. And there are even older legends that speak of sky tombs, built by divine architects, or kings who spoke to the heavens directly. Then there's the silence. When satellite imagery revealed the full scope of pyramid-shaped structures across China, including in Shandong, it caused a brief stir, and then nothing. No deep dive studies. No academic scramble, just a shrug and a press release about burial mounds of uncertain origin. Some theorists, as expected, go off the rails. They claim extraterrestrial influence, ancient lost civilizations, Atlantean refugees with a thing for triangles. But you don't need aliens to find this weird. You just need honesty. And the honest truth is, we don't know. These structures don't match the neat, linear narrative of Chinese architectural history. They suggest something older, or something parallel. A tradition of monument building that slipped under the radar or was quietly buried. And maybe that's the real mystery. Not just what these pyramids were, but why we've decided not to know. And just west of these silent peaks lies another forgotten city. Not mythical, not lost to time, but suddenly tragically abandoned. A city that once thrived and then simply walked off history's stage. The lost city of Jiaohe and its abandonment. If you wanted to hide a city in the desert and make it look like it was carved by gods and abandoned by ghosts, you'd end up with something like Jiaohe. Located in the arid expanse of Xinjiang's Turpan Basin, Jiaohe is one of the best preserved ancient cities on Earth. Not just because it survived, but because it didn't evolve. It was cut directly from the ground. No bricks, no wood. Just the raw earth of a plateau sculpted into streets, temples, and homes. Like a sandcastle made by someone with a PhD in urban planning. And then, around the 14th century, it died. Jiaohe was once a thriving hub along the Silk Road, strategically placed at the junction of two rivers. Its location gave it its name, River Fork, and its defensive genius. You couldn't flank it. You couldn't surprise it. You could barely breathe there without being seen. Its layout is unique. No outer walls. It didn't need them. The plateau itself served as a natural fortress. Buildings were carved into the soil, not constructed above it. Everything was flat, monolithic, seamless. It looked like it had grown there. And for centuries, it worked. Buddhists, merchants, nomads, and kings passed through. Stupas rose. Warehouses filled. Scrolls were copied. Then, sometime after the Mongol invasions, Jiaohe fell silent. What caused its abandonment? Some say war. The Mongols swept through with typical efficiency, and perhaps the city, already isolated, couldn't recover. Others point to ecological collapse, shifting water supplies, declining trade, desertification. But the strange part is how complete the abandonment was. It wasn't a slow decay. It was a disappearance. One day it was thriving. The next, it was empty. No dramatic ruins, no flaming downfall, just a city-shaped shadow left on a plateau. Today, Jiaohe is eerily intact. You can walk its streets. You can stand in its temples. You can peer into carved-out rooms where people once lived and realize uncomfortably that they left in such a hurry they didn't even bother to take their ghosts. There's no single inscription explaining what happened. No final message, just dust, stone, and perfect silence. It's not just a lost city, it's a question you can walk through. And sometimes, even the compass can't point you to an answer. Which, fittingly, leads us to our next mystery. An invention so simple, so vital, and so shrouded in uncertainty, it may have changed the world before anyone realized what it was. The secret of the ancient Chinese compass. Let's talk about one of the simplest tools that ever quietly changed the world. The compass. A piece of lodestone, a bowl of water, and an uncanny knack for always pointing north. No gears. No satellites. No Wi-Fi. Just magnetic certainty floating on a still surface telling you which direction destiny lies. Most people assume the compass arrived with the age of exploration, introduced by daring European navigators who used it to sail into uncharted waters and occasionally straight into colonialism. But China had it first. Long before sailors were charting coastlines, ancient Chinese inventors were already playing with magnetism. And here's the strange part. We don't know exactly when, or how, or even why they figured it out. The earliest mentions of magnetized materials in China date back to the Warring States period, around the 4th century BC. These weren't called compasses then. They were known as south-pointing spoons, small, ladle-shaped devices made from lodestone that, when placed on a smooth surface, would rotate and settle with the handle pointing south, not north, south. Because, of course, China has always been a little contrarian when it comes to universal standards. These early devices weren't used for navigation, they were used for geomancy, feng shui, aligning buildings and tombs with the flow of cosmic energy, the will of the heavens, and the invisible veins of the earth. The compass began not as a sailor's tool, but as a diviner's instrument, which, in retrospect, is extremely on-brand for ancient China. It wasn't until the Han or Song dynasties that the compass began drifting toward more practical uses: seafaring, surveying, cartography. But even then, it maintained a strange, spiritual aura. This wasn't just a tool, it was a mediator between heaven and earth, telling you not just where you were going, but where you ought to be. And here's where things get mysterious. For such a revolutionary invention, the evolution of the compass is poorly documented. No inventor's name, no patent, no treatise walking us through the shift from magic to mechanics, just fragments, references, half-lost texts. How did ancient Chinese scientists discover magnetism's directional properties in the first place? Did they notice the behavior of natural lodestone deposits? Did they observe its influence on iron tools or needles? Some suggest they stumbled on it while grinding ores. Others believe it was a purely accidental discovery. Some diviner just happened to notice a spoon pointing consistently in one direction and had the good sense not to dismiss it as a coincidence. And then there's the design leap. Floating magnetized needles on water, suspending them from silk threads, carving compass roses onto bronze discs. These weren't incremental improvements. These were design revolutions, and they seemed to come from nowhere. By the time the compass reached Europe through Arab intermediaries, it had already passed through centuries of Chinese refinement. And yet, its origin story remains fragmented, a great idea that simply appeared and then kept pointing the way forward. Today, we take the compass for granted. It's buried inside our phones, guiding us with GPS and Bluetooth instead of iron and rock. But the core idea is still there. Something ancient. Something deeply mysterious. A device that tells you where to go without ever knowing why. And speaking of old knowledge that refuses to be fully understood, let's crack open a silk manuscript so strange, so esoteric, and so context-starved, it reads like a message from another dimension. The mystery of the Chu silk manuscripts. The Chu silk manuscripts are the kind of discovery that makes scholars rub their temples and mutter, "Oh no, not again." Unearthed from a Warring States tomb in Changsha. These ancient texts are written on delicate silk and filled with references to cosmology, calendars, deities, and things that may or may not be real. Think astrology meets alchemy, meets complete narrative breakdown. The manuscripts are attributed to the state of Chu, an eccentric, quasi-mystical southern kingdom that thrived from around the 8th to 3rd centuries BC. Chu was always a bit different. While the Central Plains followed rigid Confucian order, Chu favored shamans, dream logic, and poetry that reads like riddles. Their cosmology was circular, their metaphysics dense, and their rituals downright psychedelic. So when archaeologists found these silk scrolls written in a script just archaic enough to be barely legible, they didn't just find a text, they found a cipher. The manuscripts describe the structure of the cosmos in ways that defy tidy categorization. There are references to 36 heavenly domains. Months are governed not just by moons, but by animal spirits and divine appointments. Days and hours are aligned with celestial portents that shift according to cycles no longer observed. It's not a calendar. It's not a map. It's a metaphysical instruction manual, possibly for how to be a human without upsetting the stars. Some passages seem to be ritual prescriptions: what to wear, what to say, what to avoid during specific astronomical configurations. Others are mythic histories, involving celestial emperors, divine marriages, and primordial floods that have nothing to do with you the Great or the traditional 5 elements theory. The problem is, we don't have the rest of the context. The manuscript reads like Chapter 9 of a 300, Chapter Theology, and the rest of the book has been lost. Or maybe it was never written. Maybe this is the complete version, and it's deliberately obtuse, because the knowledge was meant to be guarded, not understood. And then there's the issue of preservation. Silk doesn't usually survive more than a few hundred years, let alone 2 millennia. The fact that these manuscripts endured is both a miracle and a clue someone wanted them preserved. Someone buried them with care. But why? Were they part of a priest's library? A gift for the dead? An arcane toolkit meant to be consulted in the afterlife? All of the above? None? Translation has only gotten us so far. Words are decoded, meanings are inferred. But the system behind the manuscript, the cultural framework that could make sense of its wild internal logic, is gone. Lost with the kingdom of Chu, whose language and worldview were eventually absorbed and sterilized by the expanding Han bureaucracy. Which leaves us with silk scrolls filled with celestial diagrams, moon god schedules, and calendar logic that makes modern astrology look tame. And yet, even as we struggle to read them, they speak to something real: the human urge to impose meaning on the stars, to align the chaos of life with the order of the cosmos, to write instructions for a world no one fully understands. But if aligning stars isn't complicated enough, let's return to the world of water specifically. A canal so ancient, so perfectly functional, it puts modern hydrology to shame. The impossible engineering of the Link Canal. Imagine you're a general in 214 BC with a serious logistics problem. You need to move troops between 2 river systems, the Xiang and the Li, across a treacherous landscape filled with ridges, valleys, and enough elevation change to make your architects weep. You could build roads, but that takes time. You could march around the mountains, but your army will arrive 3 weeks late and half dead. So instead, you do the only reasonable thing. You carve a canal across a mountain saddle. That's exactly what happened with the Link Canal, an ancient engineering marvel located in modern-day Guangxi. Commissioned by Qin Shi Huang, yes, him again, the canal was designed to connect the Yangtze River system with the Pearl River Basin. It's only about 36 kilometers long, but it changed everything. Why? Because it didn't just move boats, it moved empires. What makes Link extraordinary is its sheer technical audacity. The canal cuts through hilly terrain, maintaining a near-perfect gradient. Not too steep to cause rapids, not too flat to stagnate. This wasn't random digging. It was deliberate, mathematical, and terrifyingly precise. Engineers used a system of contour-following excavation, meaning they had to understand the topography intimately centuries before the invention of topographic maps. They also implemented features like spillways and weirs to manage overflow and seasonal variation. In short, they were manipulating hydrodynamics with a precision modern engineers still admire and occasionally envy. And unlike many ancient water projects that collapsed or silted over, Link kept working. It was used continuously for over 2 millennia, facilitating not just military movements but also trade, culture, and administration. Grain moved south, troops moved north, and the unification of China quietly continued along its watery highway. There are no surviving blueprints, no surviving names of the engineers who built it. Only the canal itself, a flowing enigma cut into the land like a scar that healed better than the skin around it. Some say the knowledge used to build Link was borrowed from earlier southern irrigation cultures. Others believe it was developed on the spot trial and error turned genius. But once again, there's a conspicuous lack of documentation. No bragging stele, no triumphant proclamations, just results. The canal also hints at something deeper, a philosophy of water not as a force to be conquered, but to be guided. This is very Chinese, Taoist even. The best way to master water is to follow it. Let it go where it wants to go, but show it the right path. Today, the Link Canal is mostly overshadowed by bigger, flashier projects, but it remains one of the oldest functioning canals in the world, a testament to ancient ingenuity and forgotten expertise. And just downstream, waiting beneath the quiet kilns of the Song dynasty, lies another mystery, one of fire, glaze, and artistry that science still can't replicate. An art that shimmered, vanished, and refused to be reborn, the lost art of Jian ceramics. If you ever find yourself standing in front of a Jian tea bowl in a dimly lit museum, do yourself a favor. Stare into it. Not just glance. Stare. Let your eyes sink past the black glaze, beneath the ripple of metallic flecks, and into the abyss where alchemy masquerades as pottery. Because Jian is not just ceramic, it's black magic baked at 1,300 degrees Celsius. Born in the kilns of northern Fujian during the Song dynasty, Jian, also known as Tenmoku in Japan, became famous for its dramatic, dark glazes and hypnotic surface patterns, most notably the hare's fur and oil spot effects. These weren't painted on, they weren't etched in. They were born during firing, spontaneous manifestations of physics and fate, controlled accidents in other words, which is just a classy way of saying no one really knows how they pulled it off. The technique behind Jian has been declared lost for centuries. Modern ceramicists have tried to recreate it. Some have come close, but none have nailed it. The original process combined precise clay mixtures, wood-fired kilns, extreme temperatures, and a nerve-wracking patience that bordered on spiritual devotion. No digital thermometers. No gas regulators. Just fire, air, and luck. The hare's fur glaze, for example, results from molten iron oxide separating into streaks as the glaze cools. But here's the kicker. If the temperature is off by just 30 degrees, you don't get hare's fur. You get soup, or mud, or a bowl that looks like it's weeping rust. Similarly, the oil spot glaze tiny silver bubbles suspended in obsidian requires a high iron content, a very specific oxygen reduction phase, and a whole lot of not breathing near the kiln when things start bubbling. And yet, the potters of Jianyang managed to produce these wares consistently for centuries, not just one-offs, kilns full of them, used by monks, collected by emperors, exported to Japan, where Zen monks saw them as vessels of meditative purity. Meanwhile, Song tea drinkers obsessed with frothy green brews favored black bowls that made the foam gleam like jade under moonlight. So what happened? Some blame the Mongol conquest and the collapse of Song-era aristocratic culture. Others point to changes in tea drinking habits. Powdered tea fell out of fashion, and with it, the demand for black glazed bowls. Some say the trees used to fuel the kilns were cut down, making the specific firing conditions impossible to replicate. But the deeper question is, did the knowledge really disappear, or was it deliberately hidden? Because here's the unsettling detail: Jian wasn't just about craft, it was about philosophy, harmony between man and nature, an acceptance of imperfection, a belief that beauty was something the fire revealed, not something the artist imposed. These were bowls meant to be meditated on, not manufactured. So when modern scientists try to recreate them with electric kilns and lab-tested formulas, maybe that's the problem. Maybe the secret ingredient wasn't clay or glaze, it was reverence, or madness, or a willingness to fail 50 times for one perfect bowl. Either way, Jian remains a visual koan, still, silent, impossible. And from the calm of ceramic perfection, we now stumble into chaos where tombs once stood proud, only to be reduced to ruin and silence by a force far more destructive than time, deliberate obliteration. The mystery of the Western Xia tomb's destruction. There's something particularly tragic about a ruined tomb, not just because the person inside is dead, but because the memory of them, the very point of the tomb, has been dismembered. That's exactly what happened to the Western Xia tombs. The Western Xia dynasty, 1038–1227, also known as the Tangut Empire, ruled a chunk of northwestern China with a complex script, a devout Buddhist culture, and a flair for the dramatic. Their tombs, located near modern-day Yingchuan in the Ningxia Autonomous Region, were once sprawling mausoleums, massive earthen mounds flanked by towers, pavilions, and stone tablets inscribed with their unique writing system. Today they look like sandcastles stomped by a vengeful god. The tombs were almost entirely destroyed in the early 13th century when Genghis Khan came calling. And by calling, we mean he invaded with terrifying speed and efficiency, wiped the Western Xia off the map, and then erased their history. Most of what we know about the Tanguts today comes from scattered archaeological finds, and the tombs, once royal monuments, now lie half-buried, broken, and eerily silent. The mystery isn't that they were destroyed. The Mongols did that to everyone. The mystery is how completely it was done. The tombs were methodically defaced, stone carvings smashed, roof structures collapsed, entire texts obliterated. And not just looting, systematic erasure. As if someone didn't just want to conquer the Tanguts. They wanted the world to forget they ever existed. And for a long time, it worked. The Tangut script wasn't deciphered until the 20th century. The tombs weren't seriously studied until the 1972nd. Even now, only a fraction of the site has been excavated. The rest remains buried under layers of soil, silence, and cultural amnesia. Why such thorough destruction? Some believe Genghis Khan died during the campaign against Western Xia, and his successors took revenge. Others think the Tanguts posed a unique spiritual or political threat, and the Mongols wanted their memory erased for ideological reasons. A few even speculate the tombs held dangerous knowledge, sacred texts, maps, relics that needed to be destroyed. But perhaps the most unsettling theory is the simplest. The Mongols understood something most conquerors didn't. If you want to kill a culture, you don't just burn their cities, you burn their afterlives. The Western Xia believed deeply in the continuity between life and death. Their tombs weren't just memorials, they were functional spiritual habitats. To destroy them was to cut the cord between the dead and the world they left behind. A cultural severance. A metaphysical coup. And yet, some of the tombs remain, not intact, not proud, but present, defiant, in their ruins. You can still walk among the crumbled mounds, trace the outline of pavilions that once held court with the stars, and wonder what stories still lie beneath the sand. But the stories don't end there. Some are carved into stone, not built, but drawn, scenes of ancient life, frozen in pigment and rock, prehistoric images that defy time and whisper to us from the cliffs of Yunnan, the prehistoric rock carvings of Kangyuan. Deep in the lush hills of Kangyuan, Yunnan province, a mystery is carved into stone. Hundreds of images, simple, raw, deliberate, etched into rock faces, like ancient tweets from a civilization we never followed back. These are the prehistoric rock carvings of Kangyuan, and they're more than just doodles, they're messages. And we still haven't figured out what they're saying. Discovered in the 1962nd, but dating back thousands of years, possibly as far back as the Neolithic or early Bronze Age, these carvings depict scenes of daily life, hunting parties, ceremonial dances, animals, humans with exaggerated features, even figures that look suspiciously like they're mid-shapeshift. Some are geometric, some abstract, others unnervingly lifelike. What unites them is their defiance of easy interpretation. The Kangyuan region has been inhabited for millennia by various ethnic groups, including the Wa people, who have their own oral traditions and sacred rituals. Some believe the carvings represent their ancestral myths. Others argue they predate the Wa, entirely fossils of a forgotten culture, whose language was never written, whose gods have no names. No tools have been recovered, no pigments remain. The carvings were made by scraping away the rock's surface, exposing the lighter layer beneath a technique that requires patience, sharp stone, and an obsessive need to communicate with eternity. And yet, there are no written inscriptions, no accompanying burial sites, just images, silent and strange. Some researchers think the carvings served as ritual calendars marking the seasons through symbolic figures. Others believe they were part of initiation rites or visual prayers meant to summon game, rain, or fertility. Still others suggest they were territorial markers, or warnings, or, let's be honest, prehistoric art for art's sake. And then there are the truly odd figures, humanoids with antlers, winged shapes, beings with elongated limbs or halo-like auras. Are these shamans mid-trance, spirits? Early attempts at depicting transformation, or something more literal? Nobody knows. That's the point. The carvings of Kangyuan are a reminder that prehistory isn't silent. It's just speaking in a dialect we've forgotten. The people who made them had lives, loves, fears, and dreams. They saw the world differently. They tried to record it. We just don't know how to read their handwriting. But the message is there, scratched into cliffs that haven't moved in millennia, waiting, watching. And if you think carving secrets into mountains is dramatic, wait until you hear about a building so dazzling, so tragic, it was once considered a wonder of the world before vanishing in fire and war. Its name? The Porcelain Tower of Nanjing. The secret of the Porcelain Tower of Nanjing's demise. Once hailed as one of the 7 wonders of the medieval world, the Porcelain Tower of Nanjing was a masterpiece of engineering, art, and spiritual ambition until it wasn't. Built during the Ming dynasty and destroyed with about as much tact as kicking over a sandcastle, the tower now exists more as a cautionary tale than a monument. Its rise was luminous, its fall was weirdly underexplained. Let's start with the good years. The Porcelain Tower, or Baoensi, was commissioned by the Yongle Emperor in the early 15th century. Standing around 80 meters high, this octagonal pagoda wasn't just tall, it was radiant. Each tier was covered in white porcelain bricks that shimmered in the sun and glowed under moonlight. Embedded in the walls were glazes of vibrant greens and yellows, intricate Buddhist symbols, and ornamental tiles that could shame most modern art galleries. Mirrors and crystals were strategically placed inside to reflect lantern light at night. By all accounts, it sparkled. This wasn't just architecture, it was a statement. A glowing, porcelain-coated mic drop from the Ming dynasty to the rest of the world. Look what we can do, it seemed to say, with nothing but kilns, vision, and enough imperial funding to bankrupt a small kingdom. It was also deeply symbolic. The tower was part of a larger temple complex, intended to spread Buddhism, honor the emperor's mother, and maybe impress a few divine beings while they were at it. It was a beacon of faith, a navigational aid for ships on the Yangtze, and a massive flex all rolled into one. And then, boom, it was gone. The demolition of the tower didn't happen all at once. It started with damage during the Taiping Rebellion in the mid-19th century. The rebels, staunchly anti-Qing and anti-Buddhist, saw the tower as both an imperial icon and a religious affront. They reportedly stripped it of its glazed tiles and ornamental elements. Some say they mined it for gunpowder materials. Others claim they simply hated how pretty it was. The Qing, preoccupied with not collapsing entirely, didn't bother rebuilding it. Later, When Western travelers came looking for the tower they'd read about in glowing European travelogues, all they found were sad ruins, overgrown with weeds and apathy. The real mystery is the lack of clear records. There are detailed blueprints from Jesuit missionaries. There are paintings, poems, and travelogues raving about its beauty. But the specifics of its destruction, who gave the order, how it was dismantled, what happened to all those priceless glazed tiles remain murky. Some say locals carried away pieces over the decades, turning the tower into someone's garden wall. Others suspect it was intentionally erased to cleanse the site of its imperial associations. Whatever the truth, it now exists mostly in imagination and a very expensive replica, constructed in the 21st century, which feels a bit like giving someone a glow stick after they've lost a star. But the Porcelain Tower's demise isn't just architectural tragedy, it's a metaphor. Even the most radiant things can be shattered by politics, ideology, or plain old indifference. And no matter how well you build it, sometimes history chooses to forget. Yet even in forgetting, there's always a trace. Just ask the Peking Man, whose bones vanished into the fog of war, leaving behind a fossilized mystery and one very empty box. The mystery of the Jukudian Peking Man site's disappearance of fossils. In the 1922nd and 32nd, something extraordinary was pulled from the dirt at Jukudian, near Beijing, the fossilized remains of Homo erectus pekinensis, better known as Peking Man. He was somewhere between 400,000 and 700,000 years old. He walked upright, he used tools, he probably cooked, and then, sometime around 1941, he vanished. No, not the species, the fossils. The original bones of Peking Man's skulls, teeth, jaws, disappeared during World War II under circumstances that would make a noir detective sweat. They were being transported for safekeeping, supposedly to the US via a marine convoy, packed into crates, labeled with care, entrusted to the Marines, and then nothing. They were never seen again. Theories abound. Maybe the ship sank. Maybe the crates were stolen. Maybe they're sitting in a forgotten warehouse somewhere, misfiled next to outdated rations and broken typewriters. Some even think they were looted and sold on the black market, tucked away in a billionaire's vault, never to see the light of a museum again. The Chinese government has issued multiple calls for their return. No one has answered. Archaeologists have followed every lead, every ship log, every customs record, and all they've found is the void. The tragedy is double-fold. First, because these fossils were crucial. Peking Man helped confirm that early humans were present in East Asia far earlier than previously thought. His discovery shifted the center of paleoanthropological gravity. Second, because the loss feels so stupid. These weren't lost to erosion or time. They were lost to bureaucracy, war, chaos. A logistical shrug. And what's worse, we still have the dig site. We still find new bones, but they're never quite as complete, as telling, as those original specimens. And so we rebuild the face of Peking Man from plaster casts and grainy photographs, hoping the real thing turns up in an attic one day. But the longer it stays missing, the more it becomes myth. A modern relic swallowed not by nature, but by the human inability to safeguard the past. It's not erosion, it's forgetfulness with a gun. And speaking of forgotten genius, what if the ancients weren't just burying bones, but practicing medicine? Real, advanced, maybe even surgical medicine? Because that's what the next mystery implies. Hidden in cryptic texts, half-understood diagrams, and techniques that seem centuries ahead of their time. The lost knowledge of ancient Chinese medicine's advanced techniques. Traditional Chinese medicine, TCM, often gets framed in the West as a quaint mix of herbal teas, acupuncture, and sage wisdom passed down from wise old men with long beards and suspiciously perfect skin. But peel back the layers of mysticism, and what you find is unsettling. evidence that ancient Chinese physicians may have possessed advanced medical knowledge that still confounds modern researchers. Take the Wuxier Bingfeng, the prescriptions for 52 ailments, unearthed from a tomb in Mawangdui. This 2,000-year-old medical text details dozens of diseases, symptoms, and treatments with a clinical specificity that shouldn't exist for the time. We're not talking vague suggestions to balance your qi. We're talking instructions for stitching wounds, reducing fevers, draining abscesses, and realigning dislocated joints. Some of these techniques are so shockingly precise, they resemble proto-surgery. There are descriptions of cauterization, use of scalpels, even the application of anesthetics using herbal compounds long before Europe stumbled onto ether. And don't even get started on moxibustion, which involves burning mugwort on acupuncture points to stimulate healing. It sounds wild until you realize it may modulate immune responses. But where did this knowledge come from? Traditional lore says it was gifted by divine beings. More grounded scholars suggest generations of empirical observation and experimentation. Whatever the origin, what's strange is how much of it was lost, not evolved, not refined, lost. Dynastic transitions, suppression of certain practices, invasions, cultural purges, all chipped away at a once vast reservoir of medical insight. Techniques once known to Han Dynasty surgeons became mystified or ritualized by later generations. Entire schools of practice vanished. And modern attempts to reconstruct these ancient methods often run into a brick wall: terminology. The way ancient Chinese texts describe the body through metaphors of rivers, winds, fires, doesn't translate neatly into anatomical science. When a text says, cold invades the liver, does it mean hypothermia? An infection? Emotional trauma? The answer is yes, maybe, all of the above. The real frustration lies in the possibility that they had it right, that hidden in those scrolls are insights into inflammation, immune response, neurobiology wrapped in poetic metaphors that sound like folk tales but act like chemistry. And the irony? While modern science scoffs, pharmaceutical companies quietly mine TCM texts for drug discovery. Artemisinin, the anti-malarial compound that won a Nobel Prize in 2015, its roots trace back to a 4th century Chinese medical manuscript. So, what else have we lost? Surgical manuals? Diagnostic tools? Techniques that could save lives if only we could translate them from metaphor back into medicine? Ancient Chinese medicine wasn't primitive. It was complex, systemic, sometimes wildly accurate, and its most advanced techniques might be waiting to be rediscovered. If only we remembered how to read. But if language can heal, it can also conceal. Because etched onto shards of prehistoric pottery are symbols that may be more than decoration, more than art. They might just be the earliest written words, whispering through time, waiting to be deciphered. The enigmatic inscriptions on prehistoric pottery. There's a point in every mystery where you stop asking, what does this mean? And start asking, how did we forget? That point lives quietly on the surface of a few ancient pots. They're not flashy. No gold, no bones, no elaborate burial chambers or priceless artifacts. Just weathered shards of pottery, pulled from Neolithic dig sites across China, mostly from cultures like Dawenku, Yangshao, and Longshan, earth-toned, cracked, unassuming, and yet they might contain the earliest writing system ever scratched into existence. Or they might be just doodles. That's the debate. Etched into the clay before firing, these marks are strange. Some resemble tally marks, others look like simple pictograms, sunbursts, fish, trees, abstract human shapes. But then there are others, grids, crosses, spirals, hooks, that don't match anything we associate with decoration. They don't repeat in a way that feels ornamental. They repeat in a way that feels coded. Here's the thing. These marks predate the Oracle Bone script, which is officially considered the oldest form of Chinese writing. That script, used in the late Shang dynasty, around 1200 BCE, is already mysterious enough. But these pottery inscriptions? They could be 1,000 years older, maybe 2. So the big question is, were these symbols writing? Writing, by strict definition, is the visual representation of language. Not just ideas, not just marks, but speech, encoded and preserved. And scholars are divided violently, academically, and with great passive aggression over whether these symbols qualify. Some say yes. They point to the structured repetition, the placement, the complexity. They say these are proto-characters, baby steps toward a formal writing system, maybe ritual in nature, maybe used for ownership, record-keeping, or spiritual communication. Others say no. They argue these were nothing more than potter's marks, early trademarks, decorative impulses, child's play, not civilization. After all, if it was writing, where are the other texts? Why haven't we found more of it? Why isn't there a Rosetta Stone for pots? And therein lies the mystery. Because these symbols weren't carved once, they show up across multiple sites, over centuries, in different regions, not identical but eerily consistent, enough to suggest a shared cultural logic, a pattern of meaning passed down silently through time, until eventually it stopped. The trail just ends. No one knows why. Maybe it was replaced by more standardized writing systems. Maybe the cultures that used it were absorbed or erased. Or maybe, just maybe, it was never meant to be read the way we read. Maybe it was language of gesture, of spirit, of ritual, meant for gods, not men. And that's the uncomfortable thought, that we may be staring at writing we're not meant to understand. A language not lost, but deliberately buried in symbols whose meaning was tied to a way of life we no longer remember. A world where time flowed in cycles, where fire and river were nouns and verbs, where the stars could judge you, and a pot could speak your name into the earth. Today, those pots sit in glass cases or crates, tagged, catalogued, forgotten in basements and museums, whispering to each other in a dialect no one speaks. And maybe that's how it ends, not with a final revelation, but with a quiet question left in clay, a final irony from a civilization that never really needed us to understand, only to listen. Because the past, after all, isn't silent, it's just speaking a little too softly for comfort. And that concludes the 49 unexplained mysteries of ancient China. But before you go, look around. Look at the everyday things, the bricks in a wall, the line in your palm, the words you can't quite translate. History isn't always buried. Sometimes, it's hiding in plain sight, daring you to ask the one question that always leads to trouble. What if we got it all wrong?